Okay, then I think we'll make a start. At first, we're going to ask John and Maddie to come on the stage.
Thank you very much. Bon dia, and good morning to us all. We'll start with a little song we composed, very short and brief. It says, from Cape to Oslo, from New Zealand to Alaska, Umoja, Umoja, Umoja. And Umoja is a Swahili word which stands for unity. So we'll just take that briefly, and then I hand over to Maddie. From Cape to Oslo, New Zealand to Alaska, Umoja, Umoja, Umoja. Please join me. From Cape to Oslo, New Zealand to Alaska, Umoja, Umoja, Umoja. From Cape to Oslo, New Zealand to Alaska, Umoja, Umoja, Umoja.
Wow. What a way to start the morning. I've got to tell you, that is a hard act to follow. Welcome, everyone, to the first full day of Congress. Congratulations to everyone on this side. Look how many of you there are. Now, this side, there's a little left to be desired there. Let's try and have a bit better of a showing up tomorrow morning. Now, we've got a big day ahead, but I thought I'd just do a quick recap of some things that happened overnight. Now, I saw that New Zealand had a big win in the rugby. Yeah, so they're through to the semi-finals. I can't talk. Australia was out very early. And we've also, I don't know if anyone's here, maybe this is why they're not here, India had a huge win in the cricket over Pakistan, so that was a very big night for them as well. All right, so we'll keep being up and down on stage throughout the day, but I will throw over to Dave to get us started.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll make a start then. So welcome back to Congress for our first full day. We'll now hear from the Credentials Committee, who worked late into the night, double-checking all registrations, including the recommendations from the Regional Executive Committees and the Executive Board from Friday and yesterday. The report will be given by the two chairs. So could Ines Mano from SYSF MAB, Burkina Faso, and Andrea Russo from Sigil FP, Italy, please come to the podium to present the committee's report.
Should we?
Yeah, do it from the, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by saying that the committee examined the report provided by the PSI Secretariat, detailing the state of affiliation fee payments of all affiliates at the constitutional deadline of the 14th of August 2023, and the resulting delegate, observer, and voting entitlements. The committee checked that entitlements were in accordance with the requirements laid down by the PSI Constitution. Following recommendations from the Regional Executive Committee meetings of 13th of October, the committee also examined 8 requests for acceptance of 9 affiliation fee payments received after the constitutional deadline of 14th of August 2023. Following the Regional Executive Committee recommendations, the Credentials Committee approved all of them. At the close of registration at 6 o'clock on the 14th of October, 659 delegates and 119 observers had registered, representing 372 affiliated organizations from 123 countries. Total voting rights of all unions registered is 7,999,776. Two-thirds of voting rights is 5,200,079,852. Two-thirds of delegates is 435. I'll give the floor to my co-chair.
Thank you. The committee notes that the gender balance of progress respects the constitutional rule of 1515 representation of PSI. 305.18 or 514.5% of delegates are women, as compared with 47% in 2017. This shows major improvement for which PSI affiliates and staff are to be congratulated. If we keep this trend, we may actually be able to represent PSI actual proportion of women members. Some sub-regions made solid progress since 2017, notably Oceania, North Asia, South and East Europe, and Brazil. Congratulations to them. Thank you. Despite this progress, there remain some areas of concern. Arab countries, English-speaking, and East-West Africa, Indian countries, Mediterranean, Europe, while having improving from 2017, and Canada need to put more effort in the gender parity at PSI Congress. Overall, for Europe, if you remove the Nordic delegation, gender parity is very tight. By region, all delegated. Africa and Arab countries, 48 men and 56 women. Asia, thank you. Asia and Pacific countries, 53 men and 72 women. Europe, 109 men and 155 women. Inter-America, 80 men for 83 women. The sub-regions that have proved especially problematic include for all delegates, Arab countries, 6 men for 3 women. English and EW, Africa, 31 men for 80 women. Mediterranean Europe, 18 men for 14 women. Canada, 70 men for 30 women. Indian countries, 30 men for 9 women. Central America and Mexico, 12 men and 9 women. Thank you.
For our last part of the report, the committee suggests that affiliates gather and report gender data for their membership and sharing it with PSI. PSI should gather more detailed data on age of Congress delegates to better understand the challenges facing young workers' participation. The committee noted that for the first time, some delegates self-declared as non-binary, showing the positive effects of PSI inclusion policies. About proxy vote, the committee received 15 requests for proxies, of which 12 were deemed valid. We will update Congress as late registrations come in. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the report. I now move that Congress accepts their report. And if you remember how to do it, raise your delegate card to vote in favour of the report. Okay, thank you so much. Raise your delegate card to vote against the report. And again, I can see no delegate cards raised, so that report will be received. And thank you for all the work that you've done. It's been absolutely tremendous. We now move on to the report of the Standing Orders Committee. The Standing Orders Committee met last night, and you'll hear the report from Sharton Lund, the chair of the SOC. So please come to the podium, Sharton.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Congress. As Dave said, we had a meeting last night, so my notes are a bit difficult to read today, but I'll do my best. We had actually 4 issues we were discussing. One was about the standing orders and the proposal from the Women's Committee and the EB meeting yesterday. The second was on Ukraine. The third was on resolution number 3 and amendment 6061 on the extreme right is that resolution. And we also had a discussion on a resolution on Palestine. That was...
We seem to have a problem.
There's no French translation.
We seem to have a problem with the French interpretation.
Wait a moment.
Is anybody dealing with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I've seen a thumbs up sign, so I'm assuming that means okay. So, Sharton, if, maybe if you start again, given that the...
Start over again
yes,
from
I think
the
so.
beginning?
That might be the best way. It's such an important report.
Yeah. To repeat, as David said, we had a meeting last night in the Standing Orders Committee, and there were 4 issues that we discussed. It was first an amendment to the Standing Orders itself from the Women's Committee and EB yesterday. There was a resolution on Ukraine. There was 2 amendments, 6061 to resolution number 3 on the extreme right. And there was a 4th item was the resolution on Palestine, also from the EB. What we decided to do, let me start with or recommend that we do. Let me start with the standing orders. There's an addition to point 1.5 in the standing orders that reads, "The right to speak cannot be transferred from a woman to a man." And that was the amendment from the Women's Committee, and after that also from the EB. So when you adopt this report, I think you adopt also that change in the standing orders. The second item was Ukraine. We realized that not everyone was fully happy with the resolution. But we decided that the Standing Orders Committee would support it. It is in order, and it will be dealt with on Wednesday morning. The third thing was the Resolution 3 on the extreme right. We had long discussions about the 2 amendments, 60-61. And we ended up with what we call the composite amendment. I've never heard that expression used before, but I think it's a good one. And that means that we have agreed to a common position also on those amendments, and you will find those also in the app along with all the others. The fourth issue was on Palestine, and there is also now posted in the app an emergency resolution on Palestine, which we agreed in the Standing Orders Committee yesterday. It is in order, and we do support it. But I need to, the resolution was also moved by the EB. And I will also say that resolution number 32 is also on Israel-Palestine, and that's still in. Number 33 is withdrawn, but number 32 is still in and will be debated in session 26, I think it is, on Wednesday. While the Palestine resolution, we suggest to discuss today, immediately after lunch. And that means that if you want to speak on that resolution, you have to ask for the floor before we break for lunch. Yes. And that is in session 8. I think that's it. I hope I got everything, even though my notes were not so good. It was late in the evening, so thank you for your attention.
And can I thank you, Charlton, for all the work that you're doing, and the whole of SOC, the late nights, in order to make this Congress operate. So thank you so much to all of you. I now move that Congress adopts the report that Charlton has put forward on behalf of the SOC. Raise your delegate card to vote in favour. Okay, could you put your cards down and raise your delegate card to vote against? And again, that is carried. We now move on to item 4 on the agenda, the sad part of our Congress. It's our memorial for departed colleagues. Now is the time that we take a moment to remember those among us who have passed away in the past 6 years since our last Congress. While their fight for the movement lives on through us and our movement, we now show a mark of respect to those who have passed away during this time. So we will observe a 1-minute silence. Those of you who can stand, please stand, but for others, just sit in your seats. Thank you. We now move on to a more happier session, session 5. It's a report of our General Secretary. At least I think it's a report.
Okay, fine. Sorry?
Okay. So it gives me great pleasure to ask Rosa to give the report of activities for the period 2018 to 2023 that will cover all areas of work, including regional, sector, project, campaign and operational matters. Over to you, Rosa, and we look forward to hearing from you. Rosa's taking her time.
Maybe this is because I'm small to jump off the step.
Would you like to stand on my shoulders?
I don't know if it is for this that they put it here.
That's what it's for, yeah.
Ah,
Rosa,
makes the difference.
Rosa, you've grown.
Eh?
Okay, Rosa,
Vamos?
over to you.
I think I'm okay. Oh, yeah.
What are we waiting for?
There's something, some technical issue. Oh, là, here we are. Well, it took 2 years discussion to involve everyone in the preparation of the program of action that Congress will adopt on Wednesday. Yet, we found ourselves unprepared to the reality of another cruel war that is inflaming one of the most troubled parts of the world, shifting the priority and the discourse. And peace over war is the real slogan that we need to use for this Congress. Because all our commitment, wishes, and actions risk to be vain the more wars and conflicts spread around the world. Indeed, peace is the precondition for justice, and there cannot be human, civil, or social rights in times of war. The whole world horrified at Hamas's atrocities against Israeli civilians. More than 1 million dead, kidnapping of civilians, and the using of them as human shields cannot be qualified other than terrorist attacks. But the right of Israel to protect its citizens cannot turn into the retaliation against the Palestinian people that cannot be held responsible for Hamas's crimes and have already endured 16 years of blockade in breach of the international laws. The WHO declared the collapse of the Gaza healthcare services under tens of attacks. The UN agencies report that the Israeli order to evacuate northern Gaza is the exodus of more than 1 million persons, most of them children, struggling to find food, water, fuel, access to medical supplies, humanitarian assistance, and have nowhere to go while airstrikes continue to hit the area. The UN called, unheard, for the withdrawal of the Israeli evacuation order, and the ground offensive of the Israeli military in Gaza may cause a tragedy of unacceptable proportions, the persecution of a people, the Palestinian people, and a war crime. Moreover, it is hard to predict how the conflict will evolve, but the risk that it expands in the region is high and scaring. I am appalled and upset. Yes, I am upset because Hamas helped to legitimate Netanyahu when he was at the lowest level of consensus and when a strong movement for democracy was growing in Israel. I am upset because the international community is guilty of hypocrisy, having supported international conventions on Palestine and at the same time having justified many violations of those same conventions by Israel over decades, starting from the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, de facto abandoning the Palestinian people to its destiny. It is urgent to stop the war and avoid a massacre in Gaza. It is urgent to protect the civilians and free the Israeli hostages. It's time to address the root causes of the Palestine-Israel conflict and implement the UN resolution for a viable state of Palestine and a secure Israel. Now, 600 days of war since the Russian invasion on Ukraine continue to cause death, suffering, and devastation. Attacks on healthcare facilities, on energy plants, threatening nuclear disasters continue to affect public service workers and PSI affiliates. 5 million internal displaced persons, 8 million abroad, represent the destruction of the social fabric of the country. There is no justification to the criminal action of Putin's regime against Ukraine, as well as to the repression of the internal opposition. Energy and food crisis has been the evident consequences of the war on a global scale, and we know the decision of many governments to increase the security and military equipment means shifting investments from public services, particularly health, education, and social subsidies, providing a further opportunity to open the doors to privatization. But what really struck me is that after almost 2 years of war, it makes no scandal listening to leaders talking about the use of conventional nuclear weapons, of cluster bombs, and other destruction tools in breach of international conventions and all humanitarian principles. Instead, warmongering language is getting common in the political agenda. In this context, our efforts are dedicated to protect our members and all public service workers wherever they struggle to ensure the continuity of services, putting their lives at risk to save other people's lives. And we need to commemorate them and be grateful to them. I'd like to say that public services workers produce human rights. Therefore, we are committed to fight against all human rights violations. Gino Strada, most of you don't know him, founder of Emergency, an Italian NGO that operates hospitals in conflict zones around the world, and a good friend of mine and a good friend of Aoba, used to say, human rights belong to all human beings, absolutely everyone. Otherwise, call them privileges. And this is the way we need to approach the issue of granting human rights to everyone. The capitalist globalization failed to create a new order after the fall of the Berlin Wall and of the USSR. The political, military, and economic growth of powers like China and India has already designed a multipolar world that the global North, US in premise, does not acknowledge. The fact is that all the world is in a deep crisis of leadership. There are no Rabin, no Arafat, no Mandela to lead a process that can bring peace in conflict areas and establish a new global order. In this chaos, the international community, often refers to the many conflicts that are ongoing around the world only out of compassion. Conflicts in Libya, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Eritrea, Mali, Niger, and I can go on and on, have different origins, sometimes influenced by expansion of the jihadism, but at the very end, they are the legacy and consequence of colonialism, nowadays perpetuated by the neoliberal economic model through the power of corporations. Unfortunately, alternatives are not at sight, nor I believe that the enlargement of the BRICS alliance can constitute an alternative model, given that it is really hard to identify countries such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or the Emirates as champions of democracy or promoters of an anti-capitalist and inclusive economic model. In times of war, democracy is trampled, and this can be lethal for many countries where democracy is already at stake because of the growing nationalism, populism, fascism, and authoritarian regime. So, peace over war is the condition sine qua non, but people over profit is a necessity. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has been the stress test showing how dangerous it can be subtracting resources to public services, even worse, privatize them. As the European case shows, we have evidence that privatized healthcare services counted a higher number of victims than the public ones, both among staff and patients. Yet, after the promises of more investment, we are confronted again with cuts to public budgets, austerity, and privatization plans that increase inequality and poverty. The pandemic caught everybody unprepared. But I'm proud to say that we have been able to react quickly as PSI and organize to keep our members in touch, bring them support. We organized meetings, training, webinars. We mobilized to negotiate health and safe conditions. Our members have gone through hell, but we survived and we re-emerged more determined to fight for our rights. Only 3 weeks after the outbreak of the COVID-19, we wrote to the WHO requesting adequate initiatives on PPEs, staffing, and above all, we were the first to request the release of all drugs and technology to produce the medication available and needed in all the countries when vaccines were not yet available. And we have been among the first to promote the campaign for the waiver on intellectual property of the vaccine. We have been the first union to engage with the ILO and WHO during COVID on health and safety for workers. We largely contributed to the survey for the review of the ILO Convention and recommendation on nursing personnel. With partners in civil society, we have been leading the campaign for the waiver on the intellectual property in the WTO, as I said, and in the ongoing negotiations on the Pandemic Preparedness and Resilience Treaty. From the experience of the lockdown, we realized that care is much more than providing some services. It is a different concept of social development that can change the economic model as well as the gender-based division of work. Our care manifesto pioneered the idea that care is not just an economic factor, but a human right, and settled the tone of the discussion at global level. I am really proud of the work that the Women Committee did on care, and I'm confident that the organizing project that we are developing in the care sector will strengthen our presence and improve our advocacy capacity. We need it also to challenge unfair competition on our members. We reinforced our cooperation with UCLG on themes like gender, care, quality public services, and for a representation as employers of local and regional government in the ILO. Care is not only an area of work, is not the only area of work that we recently developed. Have a look to the report of activity. I'm not going through all the files that we dealt with, but it's a massive work that we did, and you can understand how much work the small team of PSI has been able to deliver. We dealt with climate crisis, and we started developing projects and training on this, helping our affiliates to understand the impact of climate crisis on our society, on our communities, and on the working conditions of the emergency workers. We dealt with digitalization and artificial intelligence, empowering our members on the crucial challenges of our era. Our long-standing commitment to the rights of LGBT+ workers grew stronger in the past few years. And it is thanks to PSI that the first global union LGBT workers network was created. The success of the pre-meetings that we held in the past days show the potential that we have to expand this work, but it also shows the need to defeat taboo, prejudices, and intolerance that still affects some of our members, engaging them in an education campaign. Our important achievement Another important achievement is the actual realization of the main gender mainstreaming through all PSI files. We have been able to do that and to look at all PSI policies through the lens of the gender dimension. I'm sure that the incoming Women Committee will continue to develop this work. And I call on Britta, as future president of PSI, to keep an eye on that, because I know Danny is very committed to gender equality, but after all, he's a man, so keeping an eye on him is not bad. Our campaign against privatization of public services is now supported and accompanied with a new area of work focusing on the experiences of remunicipalization, or taking back in public hand, as you prefer, public services previously privatized. We count now thousands of examples, and we can provide guidelines to unions that want to engage with remunicipalization. All this is adding to the successful work that we did and we continue to do on tax justice, on trade union rights, on gender and youth, and of course on sectors. In a nutshell, I would say that we adopted the strategy to defend workers' rights while addressing the root causes of injustice and inequality, and the root causes of the diminishing dimension of public services in many countries. Ensuring the resources to fund public services is essential to lift people out of poverty and to ensure inclusive and fair societies, particularly in our era when everything seems to be available for the market. And here is where I see the major risk for us and for our democracies. Finally, there came a time when everything that men had considered as inalienable, I don't know if the pronounce is okay, but okay, inalienable, became an object of exchange, of traffic, and could be alienated. This is the time when the very things which till then had been communicated but never exchanged, given but never sold, acquired but never bought, virtue, love, conviction, knowledge, conscience, and so on, when everything, in short, passed into commerce. It is the time of general corruption, of universal venality, or, to speak in terms of political economy, the time when everything, moral or physical, having become a marketable value, is brought to the market to be assessed at its truest value. This is Poverty of Philosophy that Karl Marx wrote in 1847. 2 centuries later, when corporates are imposing the marketization of all common goods, when the artificial intelligence promises to make deals of intangible goods, aren't we at this point? If we are at this point in history, the trade union movement has to strengthen its identity. Sometimes I have the feeling that we conceded too much to the culture of our counterparts. I see this in the case of the right to strike. I saw this, but maybe see still. In the case of the right to strike compromise that was reached in 2013 in the ILO, where we simply gave up to our right and to the possibility to fight for it. And how many times, to be part of the game, unions accept to be co-opted by the system? It happens, for instance, when we see a global frame agreement signed without the mandate of workers involved. Negotiation is the art of mediating, of compromising, but it's successful when we remain faithful to our principles, to our values, rather than endorsing someone else's values. From this position, I saw it happen, and I'm convinced that the crisis that recently affected the I2C largely depends on this attitude beyond the personal responsibility of the former General Secretary. I take the opportunity today to congratulate publicly Luc Triangle, elected I2C General Secretary just 3 days ago. I sent him a message the same day, wishing him the courage and the boldness to reestablish transparency and democracy in the I2C, essential conditions to rebuild trust in the international trade union movement. That is what we really need now. Dave spent kind words about me. If I've been successful, it's because I had the support of PSI staff, a small team compared to other global unions, but very effective, motivated, and committed. And it is because I had the support and the help of many solidarity support organizations that made most of our work possible. And I want to thank Union to Union, SASC, the TDA, DGB, FES, FMV, OSF, and Wellspring Foundation, and among our affiliates, all those who are contributing to our project. ASSR, Communal, SECO, ST, Vardförbundet, and Vision from Sweden, TU, JHL, and PRO from Finland, Unison from UK, Forza from Ireland, Union from Austria, QP and PSAC from Canada. Thanks to all of you. You are making our work possible, and you are helping to improve the working conditions of millions of our members. Now, we did our best with the little resources that we have. You have the financial report of PSI. We managed to rebalance our resources. We tried to rebalance our resources. We went through a serious restructuring of our workforce at the head office and in the region. We cut expenses. We took advantage of the 3 years of COVID that in substance blocked our traveling and helped us to reestablish the resources, the budget. But that's not enough because inflation is eroding our purchasing power, is eroding the salary of staff, and the fluctuation of exchange rate is something that heavily impacts on our budget. This means that this Congress, the next executive board, will have to seriously discuss the sustainability of PSI. I think, as I said, that we are the union with the most limited number of staff. And for sure, we are the union with the lowest fee among all the global union. This is something that has to be considered, and if you appreciate, as many of you have said, the work that we do, an effort has to be done. But it won't be up to me, it won't be up to those who will come next. Now, it comes the part for me a little bit more difficult because I'm not sure I can resist the overwhelming emotion that I'm feeling. Yesterday, I've been unable to retain my tears during the Women Committee, but I want to say that when I started, well, first of all, it was not in my plan to become the General Secretary of PSI. Somebody else pushed me to do that. And when I started this work, I had no idea, or relatively, I had no idea of how to deal and how to manage with such a complex organization and such a complex situation. Well, 11 years after, I must say that this has been the most exciting, the most important experience of my life. I learned a lot, and I couldn't imagine I could have met so many people, so many different issues, so many problems, and try to deal and to cope sometimes with all of that. Dave was really kind to me. I must say that without his support, it would have been difficult for me, particularly at the beginning of my mandate, to be able to overcome the difficulties. We were together, we shared a lot, we confronted, discussed any time that there was some problems. And I must say that the support of the staff has been really crucial, really important for me. I don't know if he's here or not, I can see him, but if he's here, I want to thank David for the patience that he used to me. I'm well known as a person with very patient persons, but sometimes I lose my temper, and he has been sometimes the victim of that. So I want to apologize to him and thank him for that. I want to thank Danny for the unbelievable support and the synergy, I would say that we had over these 11 years, sharing and discussing and trying to build up together our policy papers, our initiatives, inventing things to do, inventing new area of work. And I wanted to thank all the staff in PSI. With some of them, the relationship has gone beyond the working relation. There's a real friendship that I hope we can preserve for the future and maintain. And of course, thanks to all of you, to the many people I met, to the unbelievable experience I've been able to live with you, and thanks for letting me grow more than, well, even though I was already quite old when I started this mandate. But yes, you helped me grow again, and you helped me discover that there's no limit to the possibility to help people. And that's what I'm sure PSI will continue to do, and I will continue to keep an eye on all of you. Thank you. I've been brave, eh? You know, I didn't cry. I cried all my tears yesterday.
Where are we now? Well, Congress, how do we follow that? What an inspiring speech. What a wonderful, wonderful General Secretary of PSI. And all I can say on behalf of everybody in this room, we wish you well for the future. You have given so much to our organisation. You deserve a little rest now, but I'm sure that rest won't last too long and that you'll be moving on to even greater things. So can I ask everybody in this hall once more to say thank you to Rosa and to show your appreciation by applause. Thank you. Now, there may be questions from the floor. I'm not sure if there will be. But before I ask for them, we do need now to call the member auditors to give their report. Our member auditors are Frédéric Landas and Lionel Roche. They are elected by Congress, and their role is to ensure that all expenditures are reasonable and made in accordance with the decision of the Executive Board. Frédéric and Lionel, please come onto the stage. And they're all ready.
J'arrive. Bonjour, chers camarades.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm the only person making this presentation. Lionel, unfortunately, is not able to be with us today. He has family commitments today. But obviously, he and I together drafted this short report. Colleagues, there have been many changes within our small team of auditors since our last Congress in 2017. As you know, it's a mission which is entrusted to two colleagues, one from the Swiss unions and one from the French affiliates. The fact that PSI's headquarters are in France and the law these two countries apply. Bernard Franière was elected after Catherine Friedli in 2020, and in 2023, Lionel Roche was elected for Switzerland, Marie-Yvonne Licol, elected in 2017, and I took over from her in 2022. These various changes, including more recent ones, they have not had any negative impact on our work and the continuity thereof. Even though Malik Uchu from the finance department, well, all of us want to go further than simply checking the accounts, which the accountants and the statutory auditors are already doing. So we want to go further than that. And we decided to meet after Lionel's appointment in June last year, but we have had other virtual meetings. The financial report, which has been submitted to you, it reflects some of the problems referred to by Rosa, and you've got some of the details, or most of the details, in your report. This report shows that PSI's financial balance is a fragile one, to put it mildly, and that's been the case at least since our latest Congress, but probably even before that. And even though during the pandemic, as Rosa said, it was possible to reduce expenditure and at one point re-establish some sort of measure of balance, it's nonetheless a worrying state of affairs. And therefore, we believe that our role, that's the case of the auditors in our organizations in France, for example, our role is to ensure that budgets, expenditure and income are in line with the decisions taken by the Congress and the EB. But we're also there to provide advice and suggestions to assist you, to help the incoming executive of the PSI guide you in your decision-making. Thus, we need to continue our work to ensure that we are precise, and all we can do is simply to recommend that you rely heavily on the people who know most about this work, and they're the people who are the most important in any organization, namely the staff of the PSI. Together with the staff of the PSI, you need to continue to consider how further savings can be made, because we have to think in terms of savings, and also to see whether any possible additional resources can be considered. We can't keep on making up for their shortfall by increasing affiliation fees, because our affiliates don't have unlimited resources, and we are aware that the equation has to be very carefully balanced between increasing affiliation fees on the one hand and the loss in terms of affiliation that might result in, or even requests for exemptions. So we'd like to thank the current executive team and the staff at PSI, because it was thanks to them that we were able to get down to work, and we're absolutely convinced that the new governance, the new team elected at this Congress, will support us in our continued work. So long live the 31st PSI Congress, long live PSI, and long live international solidarity.
Thank you, Frédéric, especially for the report and all the hard work that you've been doing to maintain PSI's financial probity, for want of better words. We can now take questions and comments on both reports. We have several speakers who have submitted requests to speak. The initial list is on the screen, or should be on the screen at some point. Not at the moment. We definitely have 3 speakers. So while we're waiting for the screen to update, can I call on Margarita Lopez from Sintra, Colombia, to speak on the Section 1 of the POA?
Not the POA, just Rosa's report.
Yeah. No?
Yeah, she's coming.
Okay, Margarita. I did say that you'd be speaking on the PO, Section 1 of the POA, but obviously this covers Rosa's speech to Congress as well.
Hola. Hola, queridos.
Hello, dear
compañeras,
brothers and sisters.
Un saludo muy fraterno
A very warm and special greetings amidst this impressive report that has just been presented to us by our Secretary General, Rosa Pavanelli. It is absolutely essential for us to highlight the very important work which has been done by our global trade union over the past 11 years, where with the arrival of Rosa Pavanelli, there was a before and an after of our global trade union, to say that democracy is being threatened, that peace is over and above war. Amidst all these crises that we have witnessed in our global trade union, we have been able to observe, and we have been given a very important role from a political point of view, from an organizational one, and as well as from an inclusive and social one in our global trade union. As, for instance, to confront the pandemic with leadership and making the voices of our organizations heard at different levels throughout the world. We have to talk about this leadership that has been carried out by our global trade union. During the pandemic, we also have to highlight the role played by our PSI with the different conventions, such as Convention 119 and Recommendation 206. First, to eradicate violence and on the workplace. We also have to say, dear colleagues and dear brothers and sisters, that there has been a real transformation, a gender transformation, that is, in our global union. Total empowerment of women has been witnessed throughout the work of our General Secretary, who was accompanied by a full supportive staff. I think we have to highlight the work done by Veronica, Oscar Rodriguez, of a lot of people in the staff. Our secretariat was impressive, and our future Secretary General was also there, Daniel Bertosa, who was, as of the restructuring, the political restructuring, and all the different activities which has led our global union, which is now, and who now has the incredible challenge of pursuing these processes, which were part and parcel of our POA. And which will, of course, be a reason to work and struggle throughout all the decisions that we're going to be taking today at our World Congress. I would like to tell you that the trade union movement, as our Secretary General said in her speech, has to strengthen the identity and has to move from speech to action. This is an example of work, what we achieved here at our global union. And I think that we have really moved on to inclusive social unionism, which recognizes diversity and that struggles against racism, against xenophobia, and has also empowered the work of the brothers and sisters LGBT+, and has also positioned the work of healthcare as a fundamental human right, recognizing without a shadow of doubt that this work that has been done over the past years at the PSI has been led by a great woman who has left a legacy of struggle, of commitment to public services of quality, for the defense of union and work law rights as a fundamental right.
Thank you, Margarita. That was a great contribution, but in future, can speakers try to keep to time limits? Otherwise, we will be going over by the end of the week. The next person we have to speak is, let me see, is Carolina Espinosa from CONFUSAM, Chile. Carolina?
There.
Okay, thank you. I think we need the microphone working.
Hola. No. Ahora sí. Ahora sí.
Now it works. I would like to send you very warm and emotional greetings, dear brothers and sisters, at this 31st Congress of our global trade union. And in full sympathy with what my colleague Margarita has just said, we feel more than proud to be in a trade union which indeed has been a pioneer, has been at the forefront of inclusive work focusing on gender. This half of the world that was become invisible is now today visible. We are now transforming with our trade union work the world, because in this organization by our great colleague Rosa Pavanelli, this trade union has taken on the role of transforming society and making it a better one. Not only to be here to claim things, but we now have a more global vision. And we are going to approve this plan of action for the next 5 years, where we are once again at the forefront, implementing the inclusion of women in all our work as a trade union, not only women's work, but it will be the work of men, of the sexogeneric diversity. The focus of gender will be included in all our work, in the plan of action of our work, so as to build a better world. I would like to thank all projectors, FORSA, Ontenune, Communal, SASC, and other trade unions who make it possible to implement training and empowerment and the transformation of women, and all the groups that we make up this global trade union. I would also like to mention and say that we have to strengthen each other. I would like to give a very deep thanks to Dominica, Intufo, Susana, to Sandra, to all the sisters from staff, and all the sisters here in the Congress to continue ensuring this transformation. So, of course, people over profit is our motto. Thank you.
Can I now call Vasyl Sharlov, Social Workers Union, Ukraine.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to say sincere thanks our organization, express our sincere gratitude to PSI, EPSU, and National Public Service Union for their solidarity and support, the Ukrainian people who have heroically resisted Russian armed aggression for 600 days. But the war continues. As a result of daily massive rocket attacks and bombardments, the wall of Ukraine has been turned into a permanent military training ground. Russia has not given up its plans to destroy Ukraine. And these are huge challenges for all of us. We know that international cycles are increasingly talking about the war fatigue in Ukraine and decline to interest in helping our country. Yep. Ukraine will need your assistance and your government support as the war continues. This is important for unions to keep on function and the ability to support trade union members and workers. We are looking forward to resume our full professional activities in now occupied territories of Ukraine. Russian trade unions consider in their patriotic duty to help their military, which deliberately causing destruction and death. In addition, Ukraine Public Service Union face many challenges related to the liberalization of labor and social legislation, the restoration of effective social dialogue in Ukraine, further steps towards European Union membership. The Ukrainian PSI affiliates themselves also need to modernize and update their activities. We expect that the visit of the EPSU mission in Ukraine will give important impetus to the development of an effective social dialogue in the public service of Ukraine and the involvement of public sector trade unions in the restoration of infrastructure. As an important task to create conditions for the return of more than 7 million refugees, many of whom worked in the public sector workers, as well as for the return to work of the military after demobilization. We agree with the position of the report of General Secretary. We have a huge responsibility to implement it. Union membership and workers are counting on the strength of our common and powerful voice and our unity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vasil. We've had no other speakers have come to the rostrum. So as there are no more speakers, we will now move on. We now need to endorse the report, both the auditor's report and our General Secretary's report. Can I then, if you do accept the report, please raise your delegates' cards. Thank you. And any against? No, not single card held against. So we do adopt, we receive the reports. And first of all, I'd like to thank the General Secretary for a brilliant speech. I'd like to thank the member auditors for the work that they've done. And I'd like to thank those three people who spoke from the floor as we actually move forward. So thanks to all of you. My understanding is that Maddie and John now come to the podium. And I think at this point, myself as President, Rita, Danny, we leave the platform for what will be a really interesting panel discussion. So we're looking forward to that, and we'll be back on the platform after lunch or after the panel has finished. So if you can now make the changes, and then we can proceed. You're on the move.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. We now have a short video entitled Nurse George versus the Davos Elite. Please, let's watch.
I am George Paul Williams, a nurse and union leader from Liberia. I'm headed to Davos to confront a small group of people who are still making killer profits from this pandemic, pharma CEOs.
The reason that Davos angers so many people is because what it symbolises.
But as the super rich get wealthier, has enthusiasm for this gathering of the global elite gone cold?
Ultimately, the problem is billionaires. They pay less tax as a proportion of their income than a nurse or a cleaner does.
Walking up and down the main streets of Davos, I was confronted by images of extreme wealth and luxury. It was a strange place. A place where people are happy to eat free ice cream, even if it's paid for by a guy who chopped up journalists. For me, this journey began many years ago. saw the brutal impacts of the broken global pharmaceutical system firsthand when Ebola decimated my country of Liberia. 1 in 10 of my health workers' colleagues died. We call on governments to speed up the search for an effective vaccine as a global public good, but our calls went unanswered. And when such things are left to the market, our lives in the global south just aren't profitable enough to save. The sad reality is big pharma firms have spent far more on erectile dysfunction products than they have on Ebola cures. Although Ebola wasn't a profitable pandemic, COVID has been a huge money-making opportunity for pharma. They started using monopoly patents to stop others from producing vaccines, slowing global supply.
The 8 top Pfizer and Moderna shareholders saw their stock holdings jump $10 billion last week following the discovery of the new variant.
The crazy part is that over 90% of the research and development funding for these vaccines came from public funding. That means you, us. These are our vaccines and should be treated as a global public good, not a privatized monopoly. I wanted to personally ask the pharma CEOs if they could finally make these patents public so that we nurses in the global south could get them to our people as fast as possible. So I tried to make my way inside.
I want to know if I can have an entry to have some access to meetings going on.
I didn't know how is it possible to find an entry.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. There's no open forum.
There is no possibility to enter.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
While dozens of CEOs got a chance to spread their wisdom, not a single essential worker sat on any of the panels. Clearly, this isn't a place for us workers, who are the ones who actually make the world economy work.
Can we get in? Okay.
As I was turned away, Pfizer's CEO Albert Bourla was inside making a big Davos announcement. His corporation Pfizer will start selling drugs at cost to some countries in the global south. But let's be clear, this isn't solidarity. It's not even charity. As the old saying goes, Bourla is agreeing to sell us a fish a day at cost while maintaining his monopoly over the fishing rod.
Hello, sir. I'm George, and I'm a nurse. I want to know what's happening here.
This is a private event, and it was invite only, so I unfortunately can't have you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Thank you. So, can I come inside?
We are booked, fully booked.
You are fully booked. So a head worker can come.
Because
of several reasons. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Is this open up? I can go in?
No, it's like a meeting space.
There's a meeting space. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Walking up and down in the rain, I felt like I was catching a cold, so I decided to look for a way home.
Your private jet. Hi, and how can I help?
I am George, and I want to know about a private jet charter from Switzerland to Liberia.
You would like to know the price of the jet coming from Nigeria?
No, Switzerland to Liberia.
For how many passengers?
1.
Will you be traveling with any pets, perhaps a dog or a cat?
No.
Okay, so for this one, we have a Hawker 900 XP. Pricing on this one-way trip it's $77,000 for this one-way trip.
For a one-way trip. Okay. So, I'm a nurse. Is there any discount rate, please?
You can have a discount of 10% if you're going to sign up for a member.
Someone who has no problem paying that private jet bill is Albert Buller. He took home more than $20 million in 2021. For me to earn that much money as a nurse, I will have to work every single day in the hospital until 6,100 AD. Surely now that Buller and the billionaires have cashed in, our governments will pass a waiver on vaccine patents, right? Well, almost right. Over 100 countries have backed the patent waiver first proposed by India and South Africa over 2 years ago. But a few governments, led by Germany, UK, Switzerland, and the EU Commission, are continuing to block this waiver. They are pushing for a watered-down version which won't fix this problem. Leaders at Davos, like Germany's Olaf Scholz, are still putting farmers' profits ahead of people's lives. Unless they change their position, they will have blood on their hands. It started raining again, but luckily, I was finally let into one of the side events. The crowd here were different. They seemed much friendlier. They had nice hats. I had a big cup of cacao to warm my bones. And suddenly, I started to see things differently. These farmer CEOs are geniuses. They have found a way to turn our pain into gain. Why are people around the world clapping for us health workers? We are the losers of the crisis. It was time to clap for the winners. Now I knew what I had to do.
Thank you very much. I think this sets the tone for our next panel discussion, People over Profits in a World of Multiple Crises. The panel discussion will take stock of the massive changes seen in the world since our last Congress in 2017. It's not definitely going to be a lamentation, but would put together a discussion where we would see how we as public service unions can build a better world for our members and our communities.
Christine McAnee is the General Secretary of Unison, the UK's largest trade union, and she was elected in 2021. She has worked at Unison since its founding in 1993. She previously worked at the National and Local Government Officers Association, NALGO, before NALGO merged with other trade unions to form Unison. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning. It's a privilege to be here to moderate and facilitate this session. It's a really important session for us. The world has changed so much since we last met 6 years ago, and I know various people have said that, but when you do think about what has happened, it's sometimes quite difficult to to make sense of all the changes that we've seen in the past 6 years. You know, we've seen a huge rise in racism and discrimination and victim blaming. We've had, thankfully, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've also seen a huge impact of the climate crisis that we're all living through at the moment. We've seen the unprecedented attack on workers' standards of living across the globe with the cost of living crisis. And of course, we've all had to deal with COVID, the lockdown, and the impact that has had on people's lives, on the economy, and of course on jobs. And to an extent, we're still living through that. So I think it's really helpful to have this panel and to hear from you, a really esteemed panel of people to try and have a discussion around this and also take some views from the floor. I think some of you have been asked to put in questions. So this is about trying to frame that discussion. Can I'm just going to say a few words and then ask the panel to introduce themselves. There should be 2 people joining us online, which I can't see at the moment, so I'll start with the people who are actually here. I'm very pleased to introduce Nicoletta Dentico, who's an Italian journalist and writer, and she focuses her activism on international development and global public health. Can I ask you, Nicoletta, to introduce yourself, really, and say a bit about you?
Thank you very much, Christina, and good morning to everyone in this fantastic room. I lead the Global Health Justice Program at Society for International Development, which is a rather old organization working around a just development for all, people-centered and planet-centered development for all. I've worked on health for a long time, but before health, I was working in disarmament topics. I see a perfect coherence between disarmament and health policies in the public sector. So I'm very glad to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And could I also now move to Harris? Harris Gluckman is a Senior Fellow at the Centre on Governance and Sustainability at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Harris, would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Most of my career has been at the United Nations on the former Center on Transnational Corporations, working on financing for development, and UNCTAD. In that capacity, I was an advisor to the leadership of the G77 for a number of years, and in the last 2 years, as a private consultant, have been doing that again. My current work, as the chair was saying, is with the University of Massachusetts in Boston, but I'm also working with the Foundation on Global Governance and Sustainability and the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam. I look forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And sitting next to me is Rafael Freire Neto, who is a sociologist and has been the General Secretary of the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas since 2019, and very pleased to have you with us. So can I ask you to say a few things about yourself?
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. I'm Rafael Freire from the Trade Union Federation of the Americas, and I represent the trade union movement here. I was president for 24 years of the Public Services Trade Union of Rio Grande do Norte, a province in the north of Brazil, and then the Trade Union of Workers in Education of CUT in Brazil, and currently I'm working in the Trade Union Confederation of Workers of the Americas. Here, I consider myself an activist, a trade union activist, and it is an honor with me to share a panel with my colleagues here. I'm with somebody I admire most in the trade union world, that is Rosa Pavanelli.
Thank you so much. Can I ask, I'm assuming my 2 colleagues, Emilia and Irene, are online, although I can't see anyone. Do we know? Are they with us? Yep, right. So I'm going to first of all introduce, I think this is Emilia Saez, the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Government. Now, it's really important that Emilia is able to join us today, because Emilia is in effect the PSI equivalent on the employer side, particularly for obviously many public sector workers, particularly those in local government. It's a membership-based organisation uniting 240,000 towns, cities, regions and metropolises, and over 175 associations of local and regional governments in 140 countries. So good to know you've got such a small job to do there, Emilia. And you are the natural employer counterpart for us, and I'm absolutely delighted you're able to join us. I know that PSI and UCLG have had ongoing constructive dialogue, and in 2020 we issued a joint declaration on the need to have strong public services and decent work to tackle the pandemic, and we've got an agreement of dialogue and cooperation between the PSI Africa and Arab region and UCLG in Africa. So really delighted you're able to join us today. Would you like to say a bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you very much. I am very pleased to be able to be with you, because PSI is really a very critical partner for us. United Cities and Local Governments, as you were saying, is a membership-based organization, and it is. Yeah, we have people here because I can hear myself. I don't know how you deal with that. Is there something that I can do to spare you that echo?
I don't think, it's not a terrible echo we're getting, so
okay.
You're okay?
Okay, very happy to go ahead. So it is a membership-based organization. It gathers local and regional governments from around the world, and I have been a daughter of the movement. I have worked in many different capacities, and what I have learned working with PSI is that we need to change the profile of what public service provision means for the international institutions, for the global agendas, before we can actually shift the type of investment that is being made at local, national, and regional levels. So what we're trying to change is the perception of what public service provision can mean for the world of development. And I have learned a great deal from Rosa, from your colleagues. I look forward to continue that collaboration. I'm trained as a lawyer, as an educational background. I am very excited to shape with you guys the future of local service provision, and I look forward to our discussion in this panel.
Thank you so much. And now our final guest who's joining us today is Irene Ovonji-Odida. And Irene is a commissioner on the Independent Commission for the Reform of Corporate Income Tax and a member of the South Centre Tax Steering Initiative, Tax Justice Network Board and the Pan-African Lawyers Union Task Force on Illicit Financial Flows. Irene, I hope you're with us and we can hear from you. Nope. I'm going to look round and see if there's anyone to advise. Well, I might just start without Irene then, if she's not here, and hopefully if there are technical issues, she can join us soon. So I think I'll move back to you, Nicoletta, if that's okay. It's no discussion about what's happened over the past 6 years would really be complete without considering the impact of COVID. And I think some of the key questions I know many of us have probably been asking are things like, could it have been avoided? Could it have been handled differently? And what difference that would have made to both outcomes, but the world of work as well. So I wondered if you had any views on that.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, of course, COVID-19 could have been avoided. This is not me saying this. This is the WHO independent panel which compiled a report with very important findings, one of which is that this unprecedented health crisis could have been avoided if the world had been more transparent, more cooperative, and if science and if geopolitics had worked properly. I will make an example. I mean, and there is no one innocent here. No one is innocent. Not even the UN is innocent. The WHO received the first information from Taiwan about human-to-human transmission of the virus at the end of December of 2019. Taiwan is a great country. They know how to deal with epidemics. They know how to deal with infectious diseases. They know how to deal with outbreaks. But since Taiwan is not a member of the WHO and not even anymore an observer member of the WHO, because it is recognized as part of the big China, which the Security Council of the UN has accepted, science was superseded by geopolitics, which means that the WHO did not take into consideration this very important information coming from the the research team, the public research team working on infectious diseases, and attention was not given to this early warning. It took more than a month to recognize the human-to-human, actually almost 2 months to recognize the human-to-human transmission. That is the first, a thing that transformed a spillover into something else. Of course, we don't yet know what has caused the spillover, and that's probably one of the most serious problems around COVID. And we will perhaps not know what has happened at the very beginning, but then, of course, other things that happened is that we saw China completely bowled over by the virus, and the West spent the whole month of January looking at China building a huge hospital in 1 week, looking with admiration, but also with a certain degree of prejudice, because that was the Chinese virus, according to some leaders of this world at that time. And, in a time of globalization, they did not even faintly think that this virus could come to Europe. And in fact, Europe was totally unprepared. My country, Italy, was the first one to be hit, completely unprepared, completely useless in all ways. And of course, this unpreparedness created a situation for an outbreak that could have been regional only to become gradually a pandemic. A pandemic is not an epidemiological thing. It's not something that has to do with the pathogen. A pandemic is a major policy failure, and that needs to be recognized. It is a major policy failure. Health and public health is built and is grounded on international cooperation, international sharing of information. And by the way, whereas in 2000 SARS saw the first alert of the new millennium, saw China as really indulging in not sharing information for a long time. Well, with SARS-CoV-2 in 2020, it was science that actually, shared the sequences immediately on the 13th of January, over kind of thinking that you did not have to have any approval from any government. The sequences of the virus had to be shared because it was a very important thing to do. So. Of course, things worked better this time than they worked in 2020. Also, another problem that actually contributed to creating a pandemic is that the WHO in February already wanted, they gathered all their scientists on the 11th and 12th of February 2020 to basically have a scientific understanding of what was going on. And the scientific community was saying, this is a serious thing. Scientists have to collaborate. The idea that knowledge is to be privatized, according to the WHO TRIPS agreement, is not going to work this time, because the knowledge we have and the knowledge we will create has to be shared. It's a serious thing. It's a new pathogen. We are at a time of globalization. We need to share. The same thing happened later with the Oxford University, understanding that they were pretty advanced with the vaccine research, that they would share everything. Moreover, their research had been largely publicly funded. So they said that we have to share. And that's where another very serious obstacle that created, in my view, the pandemic, contributed to creating the pandemic, in my view, was the immediate reaction of some big global health players, unfortunately, big global health players like Bill Gates and his foundation, who started immediately to hijack this trend towards openness, this idea that we should share science, that we should share knowledge. In other words, Bill Gates, with other, of course, pharmaceutical players, did not want to create the precedent that when you have a health crisis, you share science, you share knowledge. And that is a big war that was created. Of course, we will elaborate on this later. But this has also largely contributed to delaying finding the solutions that every country could identify, could create, could design remedies against this pandemic. So it has been a sequence of failures, of policy failures, of resistances, and I think also of intrusions, fatal intrusions of the corporate sector into the dealing of the disease.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring in Emilia, if I can, if she's there on this, because listen to what you've just said. Obviously, this had a major impact across the world, and in particular, the way services were being provided, and a big impact on organisations that would normally step into the breach to deal with crisis like this. And many of those organisations, of course, will fall into both our unions in terms of the members, but also Emilia in terms of the group that she represents. So Emilia, if you're there, I wondered if you wanted to come in and talk about how the last 6 years has shifted the way services are delivered and the thinking around collaboration, for example, and that breaking down of barriers that that Nicoletta has been talking about. I hope she's there.
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Yes. Well, I wish to say to you that a lot has changed in public service delivery over the past years. I am afraid it is not the case. I think the pandemic allowed us to empirically prove how important public service provision was at local level. We saw the role that local and regional governments had to play to be at the forefront to tackle the pandemic. We came to realize that it was not about health alone, that everything was interconnected. We realized also how extractive our system and our model had become, and that it was no longer sustainable. We learned a lot of things at that moment, and we called for change together with PSI and other partners. We tried to say that health policy couldn't be shaped at national level only, that local governments had a different role to play. We called for a different sort of financial packages. We called for the proximity models to be introduced to ensure safety. We called for the avoiding the dichotomy between efficiency and freedoms. We learned a lot during the pandemic, but I am afraid most of the things we learned have not led to renewed local service provision. They have not led to increased investment or increased capacity building at the local level. They have certainly not led to recognizing better conditions for public workers. And we have not put many instruments such as culture as antidote for the secondary effects that the pandemic could have in terms of mental health, etc. Not much has changed, but we know that things need to change, and to a large extent, we know what can be done. All of the innovative service provision that local and regional governments put in place around the world were taken back immediately by a new wave of re-centralization by many national governments around the world. And the dialogue with the private sector, and I agree very much with the previous speaker, has not evolved either. And so the big multinationals are still the ones that are holding the hand of public policy making, because they simply can't decide who is accessing the goods and who is not, none the least in the case of the vaccines. So I think that what has evolved is certainly the notion, the realization of the role that local public service provision is to play, the role of public. Public is back in some of the discussions, but is not back in terms of investment, and it has not changed the place of local and regional governments in the decision-making table. And those are the changes that I feel we need to promote in a strong partnership with the workers' unions. It also entails a shift in governance and decision-making at the local level. Communities need to be more involved in decisions that pertain to their future. And clearly, there are groups that have been put in vulnerable positions that will need to be empowered in a different way if we want a new generation of service provision to emerge. And we need that desperately. There are new essentials that we need to provide. Time becomes a very important service provision that we need to cater for. Care needs to be put at the center of our activities. But I am not a bearer of good news. I think the good news are only partial. We know more about what needs to be done, but the reality is that at national and international level, still very little conscience is there about the kind of a strong local service provider that we need, including public workers with good conditions, with strong developed capacities, and the dichotomy of freedoms versus efficiency needs to be shifted. 20 years ago, we saw a technocratization of local and regional government service provision, which I think did not do a lot of good to our public service delivery systems. We became buyers of applications more than anything else. Right now, there is a renewed politicization of local service provision without sufficient involvement of communities. And here is where our partnerships need to bring a difference.
Thank you so much. You raised some really interesting points there, I think, about the fact that the role of public service providers was recognised during the pandemic, but as you say, I would agree, seems to have slipped back again. And actually, the role of the sort of private sector has never really gone away, and we're in danger, I think, of losing that connection. I'll bring Raphael in a minute to talk about, in a few minutes, to talk about what the impact on trade unions. But I wanted to first of all go to you, Harris. To you're the expert here in terms of the sort of that sort of multilateral architecture, if you like, across the world. That where are things connected? Are they not connected? And I think Amelia has set that out quite well in relation to what worked and what didn't work, and how our view of public services during the pandemic, I think, changed. Not maybe our view, but the view of politicians changed, but now seems to be slipping away again. And is that system failure, or is that a sort of political failure?
Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to follow the previous two speakers. And I can answer the question that you posed. Is it a failure of the corporate sector or a failure of governance? The answer is yes to both. National governments, like national governments, global governance consists of a narrative, a story about why the state or the agency exists, a set of institutions, and the use of power. Current international economic and environmental risks of recent days and the resistance to them have prompted some systemic shifts in the governance, as both previous speakers have noted. Indeed, the UN is in the process of hosting or arranging to host next September a summit for the future to look in part at these issues of global governance and to see whether the arrangements that the UN and the UN system born out of the Second World War need to be rebuilt in some way. My remarks this morning, however, will look more at the social, the economic, the gender, and the environmental governance issues. As everyone is well aware, geopolitics and wars are now intertwined in previously unimaginable ways with non-military global governance. We, everyone here, are in the middle of a number of powerful elite disputes. We are involuntarily and uncomfortably sitting in a dangerous experiment. In some way, Geneva can be seen as a triangle in global governance. On the other side of the lake, the World Economic Forum has their offices. On this side of the lake is the UN and the UN system organizations. And the third side of the triangle are everyone here and the people that you represent and those in other parts of the world. Let me elaborate a little bit on all three sides. On the corporate side, no one on this panel needs to discuss the effect of the privatization of governance, and it's been very clearly raised. Public-private partnership has been a public headache since it was first introduced in the 1970s and 80s. What the World Economic Forum wants to do is to take this to the international level and privatize global governance. But it does it in a different way. It's trying to get rid of the negative public hostility to the expression PPPs, public-private partnerships. At the same time, it is built out of their stakeholder economic model, which is trying to say that beyond the shareholders, other parts of the world, their banks, their workers, their customers, need to be taken into account. And so they moved from a stakeholder capitalism to a multi-stakeholder governance proposal. The current version, then, is just the latest version of corporate engagement with the international system. However, it adds a new feature. And that new feature is that the group of multi-stakeholder bodies, now widespread across the UN, consists of friends of TNCs, friendly governments, accepting academics, certain members of civil society and the labor unions, public figures. And these group of friends take upon themselves to govern a particular area, to provide services that the UN previously had been expected to deliver, and to provide the dollars, or seem to provide the dollars, for the Global South. TNCs have had a complicated relationship with the UN. In the early days, it was an indirect relationship. The TNCs spoke to their state departments in the North, and the state departments in the North reflected those views internationally. After a while, that was seen as not working well enough. And the firms wanted more direct access to governments. Around the time of the Rio conference began a process of direct corporate engagement in global governance issues. But that didn't work as well either, because people could see a lot of this was greenwashing. So multi-stakeholder approaches, bringing in the various friends of corporations, is now the new face of a softer face, but the effective, the intent is the same, is to dramatically influence the multilateral system. What we're trying to figure out is what to do with this consequence. These battles within the corporate world for how to deal with the UN system ripple down and affect all of us. And they're impacting us in quite different ways. I'll return to that momentarily. How does the push affect the UN and the UN system? Unfortunately, the Secretary General and many Director Generals in the UN now believe and are acting on that this set of institutions, this normative, this narrative should be made a part of the UN. The Secretary General wants to call this UN 2.0, or made adjacent to the United Nations. Fortunately, this approach was challenged strongly by the G77 in New York recently. Secretary General proposed that the conference about the summit for the future should be led by the corporate world. And the G77 leadership in New York went to the Secretary General and said, "This is unacceptable. A summit for the future should be led by governments." The clarity of their views is that in the agenda for the Summit for the Future, multi-stakeholderism has been set aside, including the 8 other ideas that the Secretary General offered to governments in a paper called Our Common Agenda. Those are also set aside because of the G77's clarity in saying to the Secretary General and others that the future should be led at the international level by governments. A month ago, there was a ministerial meeting in preparation, and there's a strong message from the ministers that the current system is not working. But there are big changes coming one way or another, but right now, the world is looking for ideas as to how to make those changes. And the people in this room and the people who are listening worldwide to other parts of this concern should be part of that discussion about what the next generation of global governance should look like. On the third side of this Geneva triangle, everyone here and committed civil society organizations in various places, global governance battles are quite perplexing. Nevertheless, but one of the consequences of the UN agencies and the UN opening the door further to transnationals and their affiliated organizations is that they are closing the door on greater access by trade unions, by civil society organizations to the building, let alone into the discussions. In conjunction with a people's working group against multi-stakeholderism, we're coordinating efforts to resist this direction of movement to multi-stakeholder governance. And I'm pleased that with Nicoletta's organization, the SID, we're working together on that issue. There are routes, to be clear, that can be done. But I first want to draw an example of some of the new complexities about the narrative about governance in the world, given the geopolitical realities. And that's the way the expression national security is being used. With the consequence of climate change, with the consequences of COVID, the expression national security or international security has been turned on its head. We should be giving our attention to a whole range of other human security issues. Instead, what the leaders and the elite are using that expression to continue to confuse us and to fund the military and the industries that are involved in back of the military. We need a system of national and international security, which, as the previous two speakers, should encompass major health issues, major environmental issues, major gender issues, and major social issues. And that's what should be considered our human security going forward. But this upside-down world about the improper way the expression of national security is used produces anxieties. People are worried. And it's out of this anxiety that some of the push toward authoritarian and very nationalistic positions come forth in the present life. And that's why we have to assert in our wider effort a different and healthier concept of security. But on the diplomatic level, there are routes forward for containing the challenge presented by multi-stakeholderism to global governance. Recently, the South Center and the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam, South Center here in Geneva, invited me to work with them on a paper about the risks of multi-stakeholderism for multilateralism and developing countries. And maybe what may be an idea for the future here is to actually take that set of risks and look explicitly about the risks for workers and for trade unions around the world of multi-stakeholderism. There are, as is reflected in the conclusion to that paper, a whole range, a menu actually, of what governments, particularly from the global south, can do. All of us, as I indicated, can work on an alternate vision of what we would like out of global governance. Governments can challenge the Secretary General's concept that the UN 2.0 includes the corporate sector in some fashion. They can also authorize negotiations to relook at the international liability rules, responsibilities, core issues of statehood of governance, if those who are trying to assert they should have a role are trying to avoid any sense of responsibility and liability in international law. On the procedural way, there are steps forward too. Each organization can hold public hearings on the role of multi-stakeholderism and TNCs and its impact internally. They could establish a pre-approval process for any multi-stakeholder group that approaches the UN bodies and says, the ILO, we want to work with you. And they could suggest that the Director Generals and the Secretary General submit annually a report about any involvement by organizational staff in these issues. So we are in this point of transition in the world. It's unnerving. It's uncomfortable. There's a lot of power that's going on around us. But there are concrete ways in which we can all participate in structuring a different way the global governance system works. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Harris, thank you so much. That was a really clear explanation, I think, of the, certainly for me, of that that whole issue around the unaccountability of the multi-sectoral approach to government, the fact that around the world, the corporate world has got such power and influence with governments that it's almost unseen, and so much of it happens in a way that we don't even know it's happening. And it's one of these, you don't know what you don't know. And at the same time, trade unions and those who represent workers' interests are being consistently squeezed out of the discussion. And there was that sort of blip during the pandemic where there was a kind of panicky recognition. Oh, we have to talk to the unions about some of these. All gone now. Thank you so much for that. And I think it gives us a good segue into Irene. Irene, if you're with us, I was going to ask you to come in. I know you've missed some of the discussions. We're having a kind of general discussion about, well, you've seen the paperwork, but the sort of big issues that have happened in the past 6 years. What I was going to ask you to do is, if I have introduced you, but if you wanted to say a few more things about yourself. And then also I was going to ask you if you could come in. I think it follows on quite well from what Harris has been saying about the impact of the economic crisis on people's standard of living. And, could this have been handled differently? Of course it could, but I mean, what are your views in terms of how we deal with the standard of living crisis and the role of governments and other institutions in trying to pull the world through that and communities through that? So I hope you can hear me now, Irene. I know you weren't there at the beginning. Yeah, okay. Thank you. No, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, yeah. Yeah, we can hear you now, thank you, yeah.
Okay, yes, thank you. And my apologies, I'm very sorry that I wasn't able to join at the beginning. I got held up and I wasn't able to get back in time. But I was able to catch part of the last speaker and really agree with much of what he said. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to this Congress. It's a very important meeting. I've been introduced already. I'm not sure what you've mentioned, but just all I'll add to whatever you might have said is that I'm a lawyer and my background is in human rights. And I've been a member of the Becky panel on illicit financial flows since 2012. And also was part of the UN FACTI panel that was set up in 2020 to look at global financial integrity, looking at transparency and accountability of the global financial system. So just to go quickly into what I was going to present because of time, it's just to agree with what was probably been said already, that currently we face multiple crises in the world. And the crises are happening and affecting many things, food, debt, inflation, peace and security, employment. And this is happening just across the world. In the past week, all of us, I'm sure, have been following what's happening in West Asia, otherwise called the Middle East. And for more than a year, what has been happening in Europe in terms of war. But there are other wars going on around the world as well, including a number on the African continent. These challenges, these crises that are happening now are really just building on to the challenges that many countries, especially developing countries, countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, have faced for decades, if not even longer than that. And I mentioned that these, for us, the last 30, 40 years, the crises and challenges that we face are very much linked to neocolonial policies, but also to neoliberal policies that have been introduced and forced many times on governments in the global south. And some of the issues that have been talked about already, deregulation, privatization, and liberalization, all of these pushed by the Bretton Woods institutions, ultimately really diminished the capacity of the state or of governments to manage development, but also to regulate private sector actors. And the beneficiaries of these kind of policies have ultimately been big business. So not just the private sector, but within the private sector, the large scale businesses, the multinational or transnational corporations. And in the past maybe 20 years or so, those same policies, fiscal adjustment policies, have been applied in industrialized economies through what are termed austerity measures. And there's a study that I cite, and I'll share my paper that looked at IMF conditionalities in 161 countries and found that those policies overwhelmingly reduced social welfare, reduced the well-being of majority of populations. Things like pension and social security reforms. Capping the public sector wage bill, which affects services. And so there are a whole range of policies that have been done, and strengthening what they call public-private partnerships. And privatizing of public assets and services. This was seen during COVID as well, when an analysis done by the Financial Transparency Coalition of bailout funds during COVID found that more than 65% of these funds went predominantly to big business as a result of conditionalities of IMF and the World Bank. And we see after COVID, the effect of one of the major effects for many countries, Africa and other parts of the world, is a staggering debt. So debt distress is one of the things that many countries in Africa and other parts of the world are dealing with. Overall, what we have is a global economic system that really serves to extract resources from the majority, to privatize these resources and deliver them into the hands of elites, primarily the wealthy and transnational corporations, majority of which are located in the global north and really primarily in G7 countries. Although we see that with economic changes over time, there is an increase in some of these transnational corporations in other parts of the world. But this has been the structure that we have had. And as a result of the kind of rules that we find in the global economic system in areas to do with trade, with the foreign direct investment, in aid, in debt, and also in taxation, the rules in those different systems basically serve to exacerbate the inequalities that we see in the world between countries and within countries. And they also contribute to a lack of transparency and lack of accountability by big economic actors, primarily transnational corporations. The global financial architecture is a part of the problem. And as a result of the kind of rules that we see within it in global taxation, there is a facilitation of extraction or draining of wealth from majority of countries where wealth and profits are generated, and leading to a phenomenon that has been termed illicit financial flows, that the Mbeki panel, FACTI panel, and many other actors who are concerned with global financial architecture have addressed and have interrogated. And when we talk of illicit financial flows, we talk about cross-border movement of money or resources, which is either illegally earned, transferred, or used. Now there is differences of views of how to define illicit financial flows, but there is a consensus across the board that this is a major problem, and that it is very much linked to the offshore system, which thrives on secrecy and lack of accountability. And various writers and reports have talked about it. Corporate actors and the uber wealthy leverage loopholes in domestic and international rules relating to finance, and they exploit a web of tax havens, international financial centers, and banking secrecy jurisdictions, such as funds offshore enablers in the FACTI panel report. Those are various financial services professionals from lawyers like myself to accountants, auditors, hedge fund managers, and so on. Many of these centers, the international financial centers, the banking secrecy centers, and so on, are actually in industrialized countries or in their dependencies, although the predominant view or narrative is that they are found in Caribbean islands. But even those which are found in Caribbean islands are actually dependencies or territories of the major industrial countries. So the struggle for global financial integrity, including global taxation, is critical for achieving of development. This a right which has been undermined for the past several decades through structural adjustment programs or austerity measures. The scale of the problem around illicit financial flows is quite high. And I would call on you to look at the Mbeki report or the factory report, which talk of different measures through which illicit financial flows can be quantified. When we looked at it in 2015 with the Mbeki report, we found that illicit financial flows just from Africa were at a scale of $50 billion per annum, and this was a conservative figure, but also growing. And by 2020, when UNCTAD reviewed the numbers, they found it had grown from 50 billion, the conservative estimate we had in 2015, to almost 90 billion, 88.6 billion in 2020, or 3.7% of GDP. Now, what is important for this conversation is to understand the drivers, the main drivers of IFFs. What we found with the Mbeki panel, and which has been confirmed by other reports, was that 2/3 of the problem, or 65% of illicit financial flows from Africa, came from harmful commercial practices in trade or in tax. And these were primarily through practices of transnational corporations, multinational corporations, through intergroup trade. So things like trade misinvoicing or abuse of transfer pricing, aggressive tax avoidance, taking advantage of bad concessionary agreements or loopholes in double taxation agreements and bilateral investment treaties. So all these kind of loopholes are really exploited by multinationals to ensure that there's lack of opacity about where they make their profit and where they should pay taxes, to erode their tax base in the countries where they make their profits and park those profits in countries where there's either low taxation or no taxation. The other drivers of IFFs, which are criminal practices such as money laundering or smuggling and trafficking, and corruption, really account for 35% of the problem. So 30% from the criminal practices and 5% from official bribery. So what we recognize, and which has been picked up by several other experts, is that reforming of the global corporate taxation is the key to dealing with illicit financial flows. And that this is critical to ensure that governments have more resources, are able to provide public services, are able to deliver on their responsibilities, and are able to regulate these powerful transnational actors. Unfortunately, looking at global taxation, we are in a world now, and I've tried to speed up because of time, we're in a world now where the rules around global taxation are made by a small group of countries and of governments, primarily, I would say, G7 nations. There is a report by the Secretary General of the UN, I think it was 2022, where he analyzed the different bodies involved in generating rules relating to global finances, such as the Financial Action Task Force, the OECD BEPS process, the Base Erosion Profit Shifting process, the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. And he found that even the most inclusive of those frameworks encompass only 75% of member states. And a further analysis by Financial Transparency Coalition and by the South Center really have found that even where countries outside of the G7, of the rich industrialized countries, are members of these forums, they are not part of the governance. They're not part of the decision making. An analysis that we did with the South Center, looking at the OECD-based erosion and profit shifting process, the BEPS process, the so-called inclusive framework, that for the past few years has been in charge, or has really taken charge of negotiations on new global taxation rules, found that the processes, the agenda setting, the outcomes are overwhelmingly in favor of the rich countries. But I go further to say it's really not just the rich countries, but they're really in favor of big business within those countries. And so the rules of the global financial system, whether you're looking at banking, auditing, law, and so on, accounting, really support the interests of transnational corporations and really work against transparency and accountability. And there are several recommendations that have been made by many different organizations, including Tax Justice Network, the FACTI report that I was a part of, pushing for strengthened regulation by countries, pushing for increase in transparency and accountability by transnational corporations. The Tax Justice Network, for example, has referred to this as the ABC, or in the Becky panel, the ABC. So looking at automatic exchange of information on these companies, transparency in beneficial ownership, who owns these enterprises, to know who should be taxed, and country by country reporting, so that there's clarity about where the profits are made. And the ICRIC, which is another body that I am part of, has also pushed that rather than taxing multinational corporations individually in different countries, there should be rules that require them to be taxed based on their global profits, and that those global profits then should be apportioned based on formulas to the different countries in which they operate, based on issues like the sales they make in a country, the workforce that they have in the country, the assets that they have in the country. So basically to say that we need to look at these transnational corporations as single entities, look at their global profits that they make, and then have a formula negotiated by countries to apportion it fairly between different countries or jurisdictions where those profits are generated. Lastly, because of time, I will just say that there is a process going on currently at the UN, which is aimed at retrieving control over the process of negotiating global taxation rules. In the past many years, those rules have been negotiated under forums controlled by the industrialized countries, currently under the OECD. There is a push by countries from the global south. Africa, for example, and the G77 have supported resolutions last year, and there is a resolution this year that is aimed at shifting the forum for negotiating global financial architecture or global taxation rules to the UN. So this was picked up by the African Union finance ministers last year, and then the African group at the UN in New York tabled a resolution for that same thing, so that for there to be a change in International Tax Cooperation Forum away from the existing forums to the UN, because despite the challenges and weaknesses that the UN has, and there are many, and these have been talked about by the previous speaker as well, in spite of those, the other forums that exist are actually much more lopsided. So there is on the table a resolution that was proposed this week on October 9th, again by the African group, following up on last year's resolution that called for international tax cooperation to be shifted to the UN, and for the Secretary General to report to UN members on how this can be done. A report by the Secretary General was presented to members this year, and this resolution of 2023 follows on from that and proposes that a working group, an ad hoc intergovernmental working group composed of members of the UN, so countries, should be set up, and it should then propose how these negotiations can be done and how they can be built in at the UN where there is accountability to member states of the UN, where the rules of engagement and of rulemaking are clear, and where there is a possibility to have majorities make a decision. These rules as they are, and this is the last point I'll make, as it is now, with global governance in other forums which lack transparency and which are not accountable to all members of the UN, as it is now, it is not possible for us to see increased transparency and a shift away from rules that protect the interests of transnational corporations at the expense of all citizens of the world, including citizens of the countries where those transnational corporations themselves are located. So ultimately, I will call on all of us to bring our resources to bear to support this process, but also to feed into that process to ensure that global governance is shifted back to the UN and that pressure is placed on the UN Secretariat and the leading, the industrialized countries within the Secretariat to support this kind of reform, to initiate rulemaking in a forum that is open to all on an equal basis. I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I will answer them as they come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. You've raised some really interesting issues for us and ones that are really important to us as trade unions, and it's made obviously very clear that the financial issues that you've been discussing, I mean, we all know that capitalism doesn't respect country boundaries or borders, and certainly illegal capitalism and practices certainly doesn't respect it. It's really interesting what you're saying about the resolutions going to the United Nations, and certainly if we had countries with governments that were progressive, certainly as trade unions, I'm sure we would all be pushing our governments to adopt that or to put pressure on them to try and support that. I have to say, coming from the UK, we have anything but a progressive government at the moment, and the thought of our government trying to pushing for that would be, I mean, it's just impossible to imagine our Conservative government going down that route, but I'm sure hopefully other countries might have a different view. But this is really important too, I think, for us as trade unionists, because one of the key things we do as negotiators when we're trying to get pay for public sector workers, we're so often the groups that you have to negotiate with ultimately depend on governments, is that they're always saying to us, and I'm sure many negotiators here will be familiar with this, is, and where will the money come from? And we're always trying to put forward proposals about how our own governments can raise the funding and change the taxation system to find the money to fund good public services. But we all know, of course, that, as you've said, this is an international issue. This is not one that can be fixed by one government or indeed by one union. And so it's really important. This is such an important issue for us, for PSI, to discuss. And I think that leads nicely into bringing in, thank you for waiting patiently, bringing in Raphael, because I think this is when we do want to hear what's the trade union response been to this, and how do we make it better, and what's the role of PSI in trying to push forward some of these things that have come from the past 6 years to make sure that in future we learn the lessons from this and actually improve things for our members and for public sector workers. So can I hand over to you, Raphael? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and be objective in the last minutes that we have. I think it's quite easy being the last because different things have already been said, and elements have already been analyzed. Of course, we are, I'm not going to see whether we are a unipolar or multipolar world and whether we, because there's been a lot of discussions and on this. Also, the failure of the neoliberal government, the impact of fundamentalism and the neoliberal fundamentalism. I'm not going to discuss it because I think this was already contained in our analysis, and I think there's very good ones on this. What I would like to focus on 5 points of our tasks or demands in trade unionism, and I'm talking on the basis of my position as a trade union leader. I'm a trade union leader of the Americas. We're 43 centers in our organization, TUSCA, for the Latin America and Caribbean, and so I'm very happy to take part on this table. But my position is one of a trade unionist on my daily basis, and I think that's precisely why I was invited here. 5 points, as I said. First, we have to update our internationalism, our trade union internationalism. We can't have a international in trade unionism where the biggest event took place 17 years ago with the setting up of the International Trade Union Confederation. I think we have to update not only the international structure, but we have to update our program. Trade union internationalism cannot accompany or go hand in hand with a global geopolicy. It can't accompany governments. International trade unions can't follow big corporations and multinationals in our action, nor can we follow the CEOs. I think that a division of international working class has to be defined and has to evolve clearly so as to strengthen international trade union action. Second point, I think that our international trade unionism has to have the strength and the clarity to position itself as trade unionism against imperialism, because when we put against imperialism, we can create a more powerful social alliance, and I'll talk about this later. And we also have to have a very clear vision. When I talk about a vision, it's not the production, an academic imagination, but it's a position to be taken against neo-colonialism. Irene's already talking about this. Is expressed in different forms, and one of the last one we witnessed was the European Union agreement with Latin America, especially with Mercosur. So we have to recompose trade union internationalism, and I think this is a fundamental task today. With a structure, it has to be a trade union structure. We don't need an international body, international trade union body to lobby. We have to carry out fights and international campaigns. We have to intervene in a multilateral power system. Now, we have to have democratic trade unionism, and the different expressions in the world can be represented in this sort of trade unionism. Thirdly, a transparent structure. We cannot have a structure which is not transparent, which is highly centralized. When I talk about a democratic structure, it is a global composition within our international structure. I haven't time here to go into details, but I think this is the first of our roles. Secondly, the option of social political trade unionism. We cannot have a problem to saying trade unionism does have a side. It is not neutral for us. The global political situation is not neutral, and we mustn't fear to say we are from the left. And I assume myself as a leftist, and so that I take on the definition of the Pepe Mojito's definition, former president of Uruguay, when the left is where it is a philosophical position where collective action takes the upper hand over individualism. The second defense of social political trade unionism, we have to know that it's not the same as a progressive left-wing government. In Latin America, we say we prefer the contradictions of a progressive left-wing government rather than the ideas of a right-wing or extreme right-wing government. The third element, trade unionism has to talk very clearly. Our daily actions are here to change this global order. Or we position ourselves to defend a post-neoliberal system, or we are going to administrate or a model that helps us nothing and will not help us get out of the pickle we're in today. Third point I wanted to raise here, our trade unions. We have to strengthen trade unions. We have to ask a very sincere question. When I present myself, I'm to UCA, I'm 53, and I represent 53,000 workers. Are we content and happy? No, we're not content and happy. We don't just want trade unionists for former workers, because the work market today has nothing to do with what we had 20 years ago. There's more precarity, it's more informal. We're here, all trade unionists, and we know what's happening. So I can't imagine a trade union structure, as my friend Jacobs, who died, we're a trade union structure of the second industrial revolution. No, because we're in the fourth revolution. We have to transform our structures so that we do represent the working class that doesn't have a formal working contract and that they're really outsourced. So we have to strengthen and transform the trade union. This has to be in the daily activity of our different trade unions, and nobody will move forward. We are the generation that started these changes, or we're going to be more and more isolated in our societies without any strength or any way of acting. I've already spoken for 7 minutes. I think I'm going to hand over my time. The idea that we have to take on a trade union organization's task, and trade unionization recruitment is not just to enlarge our trade union, but we have to think the trade union structure for these times and the structure of workers today that we are witnessing. We have to change our internal culture. Life is so difficult that for us, sometimes it's easier to struggle amongst ourselves. Sometimes it's more easy to have a little fight between our different trade union structures and to create protagonism between our country and saying, no, I don't agree with that because I'm not with that one, etc. And when we meet, the debate is because you said this and you took my basis and you entered in my basis. I think we have to break away from this, and we have to try and look forward and see that the trade union structure is very important for us. We are the trade union structure for the working class. When we have a little fight, they go out into the street to see what's happening with the working class. We have to be realistic. I'm here on Sunday discussing things with you here in Geneva, but I am here because I want to respond to the working class that doesn't have a living wage. I think this is a very important vision that we have to take back on board. Fourth point, social alliances. The question is a very simple one. Look at this table. We have sufficient strength to intervene in the process in our countries and in the world. So we have to set up minimum agendas and create alliances with the environmentalists, with the autochthonous, indigenous peoples, with the Afro-descendants, and we have to constitute a social and political strength that can win. History organizes, and we've witnessed a lot of failures. And once again, if we want to set up social alliances. We cannot have forced protagonisms. We have to draw up a minimum program at the center of our action, and it is in this program we're all together. In the 7th to the 10th of December at Foz do Iguaçu on the border, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, we're having a meeting on Peoples for Integration, and we'll have the International Continental Day and the Assembly of the People, so movements that don't act together. But we are going to all get together to try and draw up a minimum agenda to fight for the integration of peoples, our peoples, in Latin America. So I think this aspect on social alliance is a very important one, so as to give guidance to our action. It's not to replace our trade union struggle by another movement, because our trade union struggle must be with other movements, so as to be able to guarantee progress for the working class as a whole. And finally, I know I've already exceeded my speaking time by 2 minutes. So, trade union unity. I think it is very important that the internal culture of trade union unity, and when I talk about internal trade unionism, I'm not talking about unity within the structure, unity in our action in many discussions, and Marcelo knows this. When I go to Latin America, the attack to private trade unionism is very strong. In Honduras, 10%, Guatemala, 10% and 2%, in countries 2, 3 or 4%. When I discuss with my colleagues from the public ministries, I say we in the public service, we are the target being destroyed in the countries in Latin America, because they already tried to destroy part of the private sector. We have to strengthen trade unions in the private sector. We have to create alliances, because together with those trade unions of the private sector, we can face the attack against trade unionism. And I think that our trade unionism can't. I'm not unfriendly. I hope I'm not. We're not here to carry out trade union diplomacy. We're not here just to lobby. We are here to organize, to fight. There are two elements which I would like to conclude on. First, we have to come back to a debate on employment as the model, the central model for development. Trade union freedom, but all the culture and the mentality we can have, we have to come back to the idea in our trade unions that the laws do not determine our struggles. It is our struggles that can maybe change the law. So the idea of mobilization to change the political and social and economic structure in our countries, that is where we start from. And if we achieve this, well, I think we will be strengthened in our collective bargaining. We will also be strengthened in the trade unionism, and we will come back to some role to play to change the world. And that is precisely what we want to do. We want to change the world in favor of our peoples. One more thing. I want to make my last comment. We are in the trade union movement, and I know that PSI is that we cannot. We do not think we can stay silent when Israel has been massacring Palestine and the attack against civilians. For me, there is no difference between a child, an Israeli child, a Palestinian child, and a German woman and a German from Haiti. So we have to look this very important element and condemn terrorism, state terrorism by the state of Israel. This is not anti-Semitism, but it is the policy of the government in Israel, because what is happening, because it was the opposite. If it was 2.5 million Jews that were invaded and with their water, food and controlled and killing children, maybe the world would have another opinion. We cannot be selective. There are no borders. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right. Thank you. I'm glad I brought you in last, I have to say. You covered a lot there. I I think some of the messages you were giving there about trade union solidarity and not getting caught up in what could be seen as petty struggles within unions or between unions is a really good point to make when we're facing a world where we see injustice and discrimination and violence against workers is if anything getting worse across the world. We see, you know, the corporate organisations draining money away from communities, and our government's complete failure to intervene in most cases in trying to do anything about that. That sometimes it does feel that the trade union is the last bastion of defence for working people. I think that's why we're all here, is to try and ensure that international solidarity across the trade union movement remains really important. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that role, that our job is, sometimes we can become complacent. I mean, I'm the leader, the General Secretary of the biggest union in the United Kingdom. We're a growing, you know, active union, and sometimes you can become complacent. So one of the key things I think to always remember is, as you've said, there are millions of workers in the world who are non-unionised, who are in jobs where it's very difficult to get access to sign them up to become unionised. If you think of your union as a business, there's a kind of, you do the cost-benefit analysis, how would you do this? And actually sometimes you just have to be brave and bold and go in there and say, these workers deserve to be in a trade union. Try and work with other trade unions to make sure that we don't leave people behind because they happen to work somewhere where it's difficult to organise. So, thank you. I think we've had a really broad discussion. I'm actually just going to look, because we had asked if people wanted to submit questions. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to have a quick look. We've got a little bit of time left. A quick look. I don't know if this is what, nothing's coming up, so it's saying that it might be offline, so I don't know whether I've lost connection or we just haven't had any questions, so I'm not sure which it is. Let me see. Do you know? I don't want to not ask questions if people have been putting them in. I keep getting a message now and then that says it's offline, so. Sorry. Yeah. So it doesn't look like we've got any then, does it? So I think what we'll do is, unless we can actually find whether we've got questions, is I was just going to go back to a couple of you just to see if there's anything you wanted to come back in on. And I might take it in a slightly different order, if that's okay. So Harris, could I ask you, because I think you had that sort of analysis of the structural issues in society, and I just wondered if you wanted to add anything now that you've heard the other contributions.
Thank you. I think that where we are, and I can hear from the applause in the audience, that figuring out how we would like to live in a global community with solidarity, meaning solidarity and not something else, is at the heart of trying to figure out what a global arrangement would make sense. And I think each of us can look at the question of how in our particular communities we want to structure.
Can I interrupt? Would you mind waiting at least until people have finished speaking before you do this? Thank you. I think that would be the polite and reasonable thing to do. We all have our own views about this. Not everyone will share your view, I'm sure.
The challenge is, as the last speaker was saying, is that we get individualized in a capitalist society, and we can forget that we are part of multiple communities of people and multiple communities who need and want to live together in different ways and in different circumstances. The issue is, at the global level, is how to put all of this together. And so my appeal is to start to think in those terms, to start to act in those terms, because thinking about what that kind of solidarity means is the basis for a new narrative of global governance and provides a structure for saying, how are we going to change our institutions that currently exist, that were built after World War II, into separate little pieces? The individualization of human problems into individual organizations, and to recognize how we can use our power in different places to build that narrative, to change those institutions. And I think that again, thank you for inviting me to take part in this panel.
I'm conscious of time and the distraction that we've got at the moment, so what I might do is, unless people are desperate to come back with a few comments, I might just try and wrap up now, I think, if that's okay. I want to thank our panel. I hope you'll agree, we've had some really fantastic contributions from a really strong panel, people who are experts in their own field, who know exactly what they're talking about and have given us all lots to think about. So thank you to everyone who took part, including our comrades who are online joining us, Emilia and Irene, who are joining us online. I want to thank all of you for your patience and for listening, and I hope this does help frame the discussions and the debates we'll be having over the next few days, because this is about some of the fundamental issues that we've faced in the past few years that will obviously have a huge impact on what we do going forward. So can I ask you to join me again in thanking all of our panel? Thank you. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Linking to this, I think this is very important, free Assange. But because I agree with Raphael that we shouldn't have a selective indignation, then we cannot forget the Russian journalists and Navalny, who is now being poisoned, I think we have to recognize that imperialism has the same features, the same patriarchal manifestation wherever it comes from, and we need to take a position that is the same level of human indignation and the feeling of solidarity for all the people that are paying a huge price for us to be still living in dignity in this world, to be looking at ourselves.
I completely agree. I would also
we need to remember Navalny and the other people.
Which is that quite often there is a gender issue in some of these debates about who said what and who did what. And I think, certainly from my union, as a union that represents 1 million women, I think we have quite strong views about who we should and who we shouldn't support. Everyone's free to support who they want, but I think the fact that someone is... there are different views, that's all I'd like to say, across the globe about whether someone is in the right place or not in the right place at any given time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Là où il y a de la solidarité, il y a de l'espoir. Là où il y a de l'espoir, il y a du pouvoir. Nous sommes les travailleurs et les travailleuses du service public et nous faisons fonctionner la société. Nous sommes les infirmières et les soignants qui veillons sur vos proches. Nous assurons votre approvisionnement en électricité et en eau. Nous sommes là pour vous dans les bons moments, mais aussi dans les moments de crise et d'urgence. L'Internationale des services publics est notre fédération syndicale mondiale qui rassemble plus de 30 millions de travailleurs et de travailleuses et plus de 700 syndicats dans 150 pays du monde. Avec l'ISP, nous menons la lutte pour des services publics de qualité, la justice sociale et de meilleures conditions de travail. Ces services publics ont longtemps été considérés comme acquis, mais le sous-effectif chronique dans nos services nous condamne à la surcharge de travail. La privatisation et l'évasion fiscale des entreprises ont fait passer les profits privés avant le peuple. Nos efforts pour nous syndiquer ont été sapés. Nous avons tous payé le prix de l'austérité et des coupes budgétaires. Aujourd'hui, la pandémie de Covid a poussé nos services au-delà de leurs limites. Nous ne pouvons pas revenir aux mêmes politiques défaillantes qui n'ont fait qu'aggraver cette crise. C'est pourquoi, avec le concours de l'ISP, nous imaginons et développons des politiques en faveur des travailleurs afin de lutter contre les pandémies, de réduire les inégalités et de faire face à la crise climatique. Nous renforçons le pouvoir des travailleurs et des travailleuses dans le monde entier en construisant des projets de solidarité et en organisant la lutte syndicale. Nous nous mobilisons avec les mouvements sociaux et nos alliés pour peser sur les gouvernements afin que la reprise bénéficie au plus grand nombre et non pas uniquement aux plus aisés. Il y a plus qu'assez de richesses dans le monde pour fournir des services publics universels de qualité à chaque être humain. Il est temps de passer des applaudissements à l'action.
Okay, welcome everybody to the first session of the debate on our programme of action, People over Profit in a World of Multiple Crises. We've just had a great panel to kickstart the debates that we will be having over the next few days. It's quite clear that the trade union movement does need social alliances. We cannot do what we want to do alone. We do have to develop alliances with everybody within our communities, especially those of the left. And I think that point was put very, very strongly by the speakers today. So the panel itself, they were tremendous. I'd like to thank them all for what they did. And I think for us, it's a reminder that the world of work is changing. People are doing more vulnerable work. We have more and more zero-hours contracts, and there is a big job for PSI as a global body for public service workers to actually intervene and take up strongly their cause, the cause of people who work in very, very vulnerable conditions. So thank you, everybody on that panel. I thought it was great. It's one of the best panels that I've listened to in my time with PSI. So now we move on to with the session, Section 1, Introduction, which continues to delve into the state of the world and the major developments that are affecting our families and their members. We will also debate Amendment 15 of the POA and Affiliate Resolution 3 and Affiliate Amendment 60 to Resolution 3, the Composite Amendment. Please note that Amendments 60 and 61 were merged into the Composite overnight. And after we finish this session, we will have a break for lunch at 12:30. And this is important. This afternoon, we will debate the following: the Programme of Action Section 2, Building the Power to Create the World We Want, Amendments 18 and 21 to the POA, Emergency Resolution 48 on Palestine, as reported by Sharton this morning, and this debate will occur immediately after lunch. And later in the afternoon, we will debate POA Section 7, Making Sectors Stronger, the Amendment 56 to the POA, and Affiliate Resolution 27. Now, I've gone through this afternoon's debates because one thing is really, really important. If you want to speak in any of those resolutions or amendments that occur after lunch, you must lodge your speakers form before lunch, and that means before this session closes. So the really important piece of advice, and hopefully those people who are thinking of speaking will go and lodge their names on the speakers list over on my right-hand side. So now we move on to the debate on Section 1 of the POA. And I call on the General Secretary to introduce the programme of action to you. And Rita, you've got 5 minutes. Rosa, you've got 5 minutes.
It's up to me to introduce.
Yeah. I don't think she knows. And I said Rita. Oh. And somebody else do it.
As you know, we have focused the preparation of our program of action in continuity with the decision that PSI Congress made in 2017. Indeed, we thought that, we think that the analysis of the situation, the diagnostic of the world situation didn't change since 2017. Instead, as we heard from the panel that we just concluded, the situation has been worsening, and there are other crises that are adding to the critical situation of a world led by a neoliberal economic system. In session number 1 of the program of action is where we try to analyze and to set the frame of our policies, where we talk about the multiple crises that the world is going through, that correspond also to the new challenges that we want to endorse as PSI, and the need that we have to look at a different world and a better world. Some of the themes were actually well presented in the debate. We talk about the need to address the issue of a global governance that can respond to the general to the global challenges, such as the experience we had with the COVID pandemic since 2020. We covered areas like the challenges of the climate crisis, the climate migration that is adding to the economic migration that we are already experiencing in many countries. We talk about the impact of all these situations and this crisis on women and young people, which are the first to be affected by this phenomenon. We talk about the impact of digitalization on our economy, on the quality of the work that we do, the intensification of the work, the impact on privatization, on surveillance, and at the end on individual freedom and in individual liberty. We try to look at all the possible aspects that can undermine the possibility to build a better world. The growth of extremism under different point of view, political, religious, homophobic, transphobic, all the possible discriminations that different actors can perpetrate against people, undermining the trust in government and the principle of democracy as well. We try to define, and here the events of these last days are, if possible, adding more emphasis and drama to the analysis that we make in session number 1. When we talk about the neo-geopolitical I cannot say equilibrium because it's actually very unbalanced as an equilibrium. But yes, how the powers around the world is going to be redefined without a clear direction, without a clear leadership, and how wars and conflicts in many areas, particularly in the Middle East, in Africa, but also in Asia with the situation of Myanmar, can destabilize and make even more complicated the global geopolitical relations. We talk about the needs that was part of the discussion in the panel that Harris clearly brought to our attention, the meaning of redefining a multilateral system, and the multilateral system as opposed to the multi-stakeholderism that is promoted within the UN system, and that is trying to erode the possibility for civil society organization, but above all, the possibility for all governments to participate and having a voice, bringing their voice in the multilateral governance system. To leave place to the overwhelming power of corporates and of the financial system. In a nutshell, I would say that this is the frame, the concept of how we see the situation and in which direction we would like PSI to work and build alliance with those who share with us the idea that a better world is possible if we can strengthen the multilateral system, rethink the international organizations that are no longer, that can no longer respond to the challenges and the changes in the geopolitical scenario that we live in the 21st century. I think that this is the abstract that I can present of this session of the program of action.
Okay, thank you for that, Rosa.
I mean, I read it quite sometimes.
I will now take speakers in favour of section 1 of the programme of action. Have we been notified of any?
Sorry? Speakers in favour. Yeah, the first one is.
So, yeah, at this point, I invite Heike Erkers, academic Fundamentet from Sweden, to speak in favour of section 1 of the POA.
Sorry about
Okay. Dear Congress, sisters, brothers, dear friends. Mitt namn är Heike Erkers och jag är
My name is Heike Erkers. I'm president of Akademikerförbundet SSA, the union representing academics.
Främlingsfientligheten och ren fascism sprider sig som en löpeld över hela
Fascism and hostility towards foreigners is spreading all across the world, and it has come to Sweden as well. Wienermark's nationalistic parties are gaining ground. In fact, developments are going all the wrong way. Research demonstrates that the number of democratic nations in the world is dwindling. In the 25 past years, we've had positive developments, but those have now gone down the drain. 70% of the world's population is living in an autocracy, 30% only in a democracy. The room for the civil society is dwindling. It's shrinking. We see that all over the world. Threats and reprisal towards trade union members, union activists, and autocracies as autocratic governments grow stronger, democracy shrinks, freedom of expression is forgotten all about, and human rights and women's positions are also weakened. But, sisters and brothers, I think we must always remember that this is a very serious situation, because it's perfectly possible to get rid of a democracy by vote, but we can never vote it back in again. It's taken generations to develop these democracies, and it's being destroyed so quickly. But we, the trade union movement, are the largest democratic organization in the world. Together, we organize millions of workers across the globe. We, trade union representatives, and our organization have to make a contribution to changing this situation, reversing the situation, and strengthening democracy. That is our duty. It's duty for the future, for our children and their children. We are represented throughout the community. There are experienced and strong union representatives all over the place, and we need to support them so that they can fight on a daily basis in our jobs. We have to build alliances with progressive politicians and union organizations and major civil society organizations so that together we can stand up and defend democracy. Together we're strong. Together we can regain and rebuild democracy. So I would urge that you approve the proposal and Resolution 3 with the new proposed amendment to our program of action. Thank you.
I now invite Juan Cazot from APL Argentina and CONSLAC to speak in favor of Section 1 of PUA.
Hello, brothers and sisters who are present in this plurinational meeting and multicultural meeting. As a legislative worker in Latin America, I had to be in favor and precisely strengthen this process, where fundamental democracy for the recognition of workers' rights. At this time, I would like to say the trade wars and conventional wars go hand in hand to try and sap democracy. International law is constantly run amok, and everybody's turned towards profit and weapons, and of course look down on people's workers. For workers, this situation is very moving and of course demands action from us. We are, with our blood and our deprivations, we pay the bills of these measures taken by the concentrated powers and the warmongering adventures. We have to strengthen, we really have to strengthen democracy as a space precisely where dialogue can take place, dialogue that we have on an ongoing basis to improve and build rights and to strengthen these very rights. It is in that way that this unity in action, in this diversity we have, bring us together. It's precisely this action is what brings us together. I work in the legislative in Latin America, and we have to be present. We have to promote, as workers, this plan of action which strengthens the concept of democracy that brings us all together, that unites us. Thank you.
Okay, as there are no speakers against, we'll now move on through the POA. We'll now debate Amendment 15 to the POA, which is opposed by the Executive Board. I call on Edison Cardone from COND-SEF from Brazil to speak to Amendment 15. And Edison, you have 3 minutes.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Good morning. On behalf of the delegation of the Confederation of Workers of the Federal Public Service of Brazil, I would like to send our greetings to the top table and to all the members present at this Congress. I would like to thank you for accepting our statements, and I do apologize, but I'm going to carry out some reflection with you. Putin has the right to invade Ukraine, has expanded his country over 3 countries in Europe, and has concluded with Ukraine. No, Putin did not have that right. We have the obligation to defend self-determination of the Ukrainian people, and therefore we have to demand the withdrawal of Russian troops, Putin's Russian troops, from the Ukrainian territory. We are in war against are we against the peoples of Russia or Ukrainian people? No. Is war the way to peace? No. Is arms coherent with the defense of peace? No. In 1914, the people were murdered because they were against the war. Jean Jaurès said, "Capitalism brings war, as a cloud brings rain." Jean Jaurès was right in 1914. Yes, he was right. In 1938, on the eve of the Second World War, this sentence was still valid. Yes. And today, in 2023, this assertion, is it still valid? Yes, 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 1,000 times yes. This war is the produce of the decomposition of the capitalist market, which is pushing humanity to the edge, as we witness every day throughout the world. Barbarity, social equality, as we see in Africa. Barbarity with massacres, as we're now witnessing in Palestine. This war interests the Russian oligarchy, the Kremlin that wants to defend its privileges, the multilateral interests that want to put their hands in the pot of Russian wealth and Ukrainian wealth. As Brazilians, we are encouraged by the position of our government, President Lula, that condemned the invasion of Ukraine, that refused to send weapons and defends an immediate ceasefire, and that is fighting for a negotiated solution. But we are a trade union, and we have our independent position, and we have to preserve it. This is the way the PSI, which is also a trade union organization, has to have an independent position from the Macrons, Schulz's, or Biden's. Yes. The people over profit. Yes. Peace over war. Yes. As a song that moved us so much at the beginning of this Congress, we are going to build a bridge over troubled water. I would like to recall another English artist. Give peace a chance. No war. No Putin. nor NATO. I would ask this Congress to approve this amendment, which I think does say that governments, the warmongering governments, are responsible for war, all of them. And I would also like to say, to conclude, that our objective in solidarity is to fight for peace. Thank you.
So we're here. Yep. Okay, thank you. I now call on Anastasia Prudnikova from the Energy Workers Union, Ukrainato, to speak against Amendment 15.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we agree that this war is aggressive, and I would add large-scale war by Russia against Ukraine. But if we follow the logic of the authors of the amendment, we should have mentioned that this war is also being fueled by China, by North Korea and Iran, who are openly supplying Russia with weapons, which they use to kill civilians in Ukraine. We should say that as for US fueling this warmongering through NATO, this is a manipulative thing to say, to switch the blame. And we can't say that because this is in fact US helping our country to suffer, which is suffering from Russian aggression. It is also worth mentioning that Russia has openly declared that their main goal is denazification. But in fact, it's a genocide of Ukrainian as a nation. Another goal is demilitarization of Ukraine, which had given up all its nuclear weapons according to Budapest Memorandum. In return, according to this same memorandum, Russia has become a guarantor of the inviolability of Ukraine's territorial integrity. And now, Russia is the one who had broken it. The Ukrainians is a peaceful nation, and we Ukrainians and Ukrainian trade unions are only in favor of an end to this war, but only on one condition, that not a single Russian soldier will remain on the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Otherwise, thank you. Otherwise, the reconciliation will only be a pause before the continuing of the hostilities by Russia. Therefore, we call on rejecting this amendment as it doesn't reflect the real state of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia. I now call on Odd Larsen from Fagforbundet Norway to speak against Amendment 15.
Thank you, President. Dear Congress, in a time of many different conflicts, PSI has to consider its role to look at the public sector and workers in all professions. Ukraine was attacked. There's only one aggressor in Ukraine. And from the Nordics, we feel that the program of action shows a particular perspective on the geopolitical proposals. And we can never have any other players pointed out. It was Russia who was the aggressor. Ukraine has to be rebuilt. We have to support the public sector and the civil society, focusing on developing the technical sector, healthcare, etc. And we feel that it's important to stick to a balanced proposal, and we should follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Odd. I've got no further speakers, so at this stage, I'm going to ask Edison Cardoni if he wishes to exercise his right of reply. Before you speak this time, I've been very, very lenient with timescales, but with the right of reply, a right of reply is 2 minutes. So so you will need to end your speech in the 2-minute time period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would thank you for giving me the floor again. I agree that we have to condemn the Russians' position. That is what I said. And that is what the Brazilian government says. We cannot want to save a country invading schools, hospitals, and trampling self-determination of the country as Putin did. We say this quite clearly. This war, it is the Russian oligarchy that is carrying it out to protect its privileges. And we must not forget that nurturing the war by militarism is a problem as well. What the amendment proposes simply to register this and conclude that we all unanimously, as our colleague from Ukraine said, we want the end of the war. And that is why we demand the withdrawal of the Russian troops from Ukraine. We want a ceasefire, and together we are going to fight for peace, for a negotiated solution. That is the proposed amendment. That is why I repeat our request so that it be approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I'm now going to invite you to vote on Amendment 15 to Section 1, Introduction of the POA, which the Executive Board is opposing. So, if you are in favour of Amendment 15, please show your delegate cards now. Very few. Okay, could you please put your delegate cards down? There's a number over in that corner. I'll now ask you to raise your delegate card if you wish to vote against Amendment 15. Okay, thank you for that. And just for clarity, does anybody wish to record abstention? If now, put your card. There's one or two over that direction. The vote was overwhelmingly against Amendment 15. So Amendment 15 falls. We will now vote to adopt Section 1 of the Programme of Action. Raise your delegate badge to vote in favour of Section 1 of the Programme of Action. Okay, if you could put your cards down, please. And raise your delegate's badge if you wish to vote against the introduction. Section 1. No? So I now declare Section 1 of the POA adopted. We now move on to deal with Resolution 3 and Composite Amendment 60. Conference participants are asked to note that a short phrase was missed from the end of Amendment 60 when the resolutions were first published on the 14th of August. This was rectified on the 13th of September, and the corrected version was uploaded onto our website. Also, the Standing Orders Committee reported this morning that the movers of Amendment 60 and 61 had agreed on a composite amendment, which I presume is Amendment 60. SOC have accepted this composite amendment and posted it overnight. The SOC supports Resolution 3 and the new composite amendment 60. And I now call on Natasha Domé from CGT Services Publiques France to move Resolution 3 as well as the Amendment 60, which is supported by the Executive Board. I think there may be a problem with the speaker.
Good morning to you all. Social imposture carried by extreme right parties is expanding both in companies and in public services. The working world is not escaping this reality. The instrumentalization of precarity, the lack of responses to workers' needs, and nurture the lands of the extreme right, and of course make their ideas more commonplace in the very difficult economic context where all witnesses, each and every one of us can feel that they are suffering from the choices taken by economists that want rapid profit, fruit of exacerbated capitalism. The nationalistic speech and in appearance is moderate and that denounces in full simplicity all those responsible politically does seduce an electorate which is broader and broader. We are more and more countries in the world that are hit by these ideas of the extreme right, neo-fascist parties, xenophobic countries, populistic countries and nationalistic parties come to power. The risk is enormous to see the extreme right progress even more during the coming elections. I am thinking here of European elections in June 2024. We, trade union organizations, meeting at the 31st World Congress of Public Services International, have the responsibility of reasserting our commitment to struggle against extreme right ideology and to combat racism and anti-Semitism. We have to make this an absolute priority, and we must not give up. Strong trade unions, independent and inclusive trade unions, are absolutely fundamental if we are to build peaceful societies, sustainable societies which are fairer, together, in a perspective of emancipation and social progress for everyone. We must mobilize in the greatest unity so as to carry out a counter-offensive, an ideological counter-offensive in favor of democracy, social justice, the state of law, the rule of law, and the non-discrimination of collective action, of public services, of fundamental rights, of equality of gender and equality for all. All trade union organizations in France invite you to support Resolution 3 that includes the composite amendment 60. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I now invite Jill Cohenhoff from AFT, the USA, to speak in favour of Amendment 60.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Jill Cohenauer from AFT in the US. I rise to protest the authoritarian populist regimes and the political movements that control these regimes. I want to remind you of an old joke with a bit of a twist. A dictator, a union member, and a minority woman, LGBTQ, or disabled person sit at a table with 12 cookies on a plate. Insert your favorite other fear-mongering type, class, or variety. The dictator grabs 11 cookies, gives them to his CEO pal, and tells the union member, "You better watch that other, he wants your cookie." The dictator took 11 out of 12 cookies and gave them to his wealthy friend, leaving the rest of us to fight over the one cookie, weaponizing fear to create chaos needed to protect their power. Authoritarian governments have always sought to suppress unions and other free institutions of civil society as threats to their power. They traffic in misinformation and fear to control the narrative and create chaos. Center to their appeal is the targeting of other, immigrants, refugees, religious and ethnic minorities, women, LGBTQ workers, and disabled people. The United States is not exempt from these trends. We have experienced the undermining of the foundations of our democracy. Unaccountable corporate money manipulating political systems, polarization, obstruction of normal government processes, voter suppression, disenfranchising other, and the union suppression designed to undermine the freedoms of working people to organize, collectively act, and communicate alternate views. I urge support of this resolution to affirm the centrality of democracy and freedom to our core mission as trade unionists and professionals, and to recommit to the defense of democracy in workplaces, on campuses, in government, in civil society, across the globe. This global federation of unions in PSI can and will fight back. We stand with our brothers and sisters in PSI to fight together and win. I urge support of this resolution.
Thank you, Jill. I now invite Sandra Micha from Kommunal, Sweden, to speak in favour of Amendment 60.
Kära vänner, ordförande och gäster.
Dear friends, colleague, Kommunal urges that you support the motion. My name is Sandra McCall. I'm from Kommunal in Sweden. Sisters and brothers, it's very important that we think about the political situation in Sweden today. In Sweden, like many other countries, well, Sweden is considered to be a socialist country, an open country. Well, instead, what's homophobia, Islamophobia, and racism are spreading. The class divide is widening, and few people are joining the union. This may be due to the fact that the working classes in desperation have started voting to the right because the left wing is no longer delivering satisfactory class policies. And instead of good social care, suggestion is being made to keep asylum seekers in a special place. This furthers hatred and fear. We used to have an excellent welfare system in Sweden, but there is a genuine danger that if current politics continue, it will be destroyed. Our welfare system has long been the bedrock of our society. It's been the very core of our community. The situation is very serious indeed. The more support that is given to fascism and nationalistic ideas, the greater the threat to our tradition of openness and strong trade unions and variety. It's important that our trade unions should continue to stand up for equality and welfare. The working classes need all the support they can get. International trade union solidarity is the key. And together we will win the battle to promote equal rights and equality for all people. It is our common battle. Thank you, sisters and brothers.
Thank you, Zander. We now move to the vote on Amendment 60. And as we've done before, please raise your delegate card if you are in favour. Okay, thank you for that. And please raise your delegate card if you are against. No, that's clearly carried. So we'll now vote on Resolution 3 as amended by Amendment 60. Raise your card if you are in favour. And thank you so much. Raise your card if you are against. Again, that is carried overwhelmingly. Thank you for that. That is the end of the session this morning. But we do have quite a number of housekeeping points which are important, so don't rush off. The first one, and again, I'm saying this very, very gently, but this morning we had to ask you not to use telephones while in the hall. But it does appear that a number of people are still having meetings in the hall, small huddles, small groups coming together, and it is a little bit difficult for those people who wish to listen to the debate. So please, if you do want to have a chat about anything, if you could just go to the outside of the door, that'd be really helpful for the delegates who are listening to the debates. We're breaking for lunch now, and this afternoon we will debate POA Section 2, Building the Power to Create the World We Want, Amendments 18 and 21, POA Section 7, Making Sectors Stronger, Amendment 56, Related Affiliate Resolution 27, and Emergency Resolution 48 on Palestine. This will happen immediately after lunch. The Emergency Resolution 48 on Palestine will happen immediately after lunch. Please note that if you wish to speak this afternoon, you must have submitted your request to speak on the form by now. The desk is closing in about 3 or 4 minutes in order to get to the desk if you do want to speak this afternoon. There'll also be a panel, a new post-COVID militancy for public service workers. That will be at 2:30. And the presentation of candidates, again, an important event for the positions of General Secretary and President, will be at 5 o'clock, 1700 hours. Lunch meeting today is on climate activism in the workplace from 12:30 p.m. to 2 in room WW. Is that one W? In room WW. You can take your lunch from the cafeteria by scanning the QR code behind your badge, only if you have selected this option when registering. And we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock.
And right on time.
Oh, yeah. Where were they? Oh, sorry.